If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 106.5, I think you can't cut it. Ash's protective magic nullified each strike effortlessly, turning the attacks into harmless particles of light that dissipated in the air just as before. Undeterred, Yubel summoned a trident-shaped magic wand and lunged at him, aiming directly for his face. But Ash, still seated casually on the fence, merely flicked his finger. Bang! The sound of metal colliding rang out as the wand was sent flying, spinning into the air with a force that exceeded Yubel's imagination. Disarmed and outmatched, she finally lowered her hands in surrender, a resigned expression on her face. You're truly a terrifying monster, she muttered. Thank you, Ash replied, his tone light. What? Yubel narrowed her eyes. Ash shrugged, his expression indifferent. In many ways. Kill you. She repeated, her frustration evident. You can't, Ash said simply. To be honest, this is the first time I've been this angry, Yubel admitted, though her tone had lost its edge. With no way to retaliate, she sat down beside him again, a dark smile creeping back onto her face. You suggested it yourself, Ash reminded her. You can't blame me for this. Is it normal to lift someone else's skirt? She asked, her voice tight with exasperation. Well, it was your suggestion, Ash said, refusing to take any responsibility. Yubel's mouth twitched in frustration. Where's your gentlemanly demeanor? Or the reserve of a strong man? I'm a feminist, Ash said smoothly. It's just a normal exchange between equals. An exchange? Are you saying a name is as important as a girl's purity? That's your question, not mine, Ash replied with a shrug. You should ask yourself that. His casual response left Yubel momentarily speechless. In the end, she suffered a complete defeat, outmatched in magic, physical combat, and even verbal sparring. For the first time in her life, she regretted her actions, regretted ever speaking to him in the first place. When Sen returned after gathering information and piecing together some clues, he saw a strange girl standing next to Ash from a distance. The girl, her back to him, appeared to be talking animatedly with Ash. Her skirt swayed slightly, and from Sen's perspective, it almost looked like Ash had lifted her skirt. Yes, almost. The angle made it impossible to be sure. The girl had her back turned, and Ash's calm, unperturbed expression didn't exactly scream guilt. Yet, no matter how he analyzed the scene, the girl's exaggerated behavior made it seem like Ash had indeed lifted her skirt. Sen stood frozen in place, bewildered. After a long pause, he finally strode forward, his expression serious as he confronted Ash, who turned to him with a questioning look. I really misjudged you. Sen declared with a tone of betrayal. What are you talking about all of a sudden? Ash asked, visibly puzzled. I thought you were like me. I thought you only liked big sisters. Sen's words carried the weight of disappointment, as if his trust had been shattered. He glared at Ash, denouncing him for what he assumed was an attack on the girl. Ash, however, simply covered his face, looking as though he was trying to stave off a headache. Even Yubel, who was strange in her own right, was caught off guard. She stared at Sen, momentarily stunned. Despite encountering all sorts of eccentric people during her travels, this was her first time meeting a priest with such peculiar tastes. Your friends are really interesting, Yubel said, her voice laced with amusement. Then, turning to Ash, she added with a teasing smile, so, you like older sisters? No wonder you've been so cold to me. Are you still not planning to leave? Ash ignored her remark, his voice tinged with exasperation. Actually, I quite enjoy chatting, Yubel replied cheerfully, unfazed by his indifference. She continued speaking as if carrying on a conversation with herself, her smile unwavering. You see, the magic a person excels at often reflects their life and personality. As for me, if I can resonate with someone's life, I can basically replicate their unique magic. You must have some incredible magic, right? Don't be stingy, tell me what you think and what kind of life you've lived. So, you're the type who controls magic based on intuition? Ash asked, finally piecing together why she couldn't defeat him yet continued to pester him. His tone betrayed a hint of surprise. Her abilities were extraordinary. Not only did they require immense talent, but also a solid theoretical foundation and a deep reserve of magical power. By relying on her exceptional sensory perception and vivid imagination, she could resonate with someone's essence, their character and life experiences, and use that connection to replicate their magic, even without fully understanding its principles. Such individuals were exceedingly rare. Liney, on the other hand, was a similar type but an upgraded version in a different direction. Liney didn't need such elaborate processes, she could replicate someone's martial arts simply by observing them. However, this kind of replication came with a significant flaw: if the original source wasn't particularly powerful, the replicated magic or technique would be of limited use. Still, Yubel was clearly exceptional by human standards. She could likely replicate and restore most forms of magic with remarkable accuracy. Of course, none of this mattered to Ash. With magic as overwhelming as that of a great demon, there was no way Yubel could resonate with him, let alone comprehend or replicate his abilities. Even if he patiently explained his techniques to her step by step, it would make no difference. After all, even if humans could understand it, they would never be able to wield the magic of a great demon. Don't be so stingy, there's nothing wrong with chatting. I can even tell you about my life. Yubel seemed completely oblivious to Ash's indifference. Instead, she acted as if she'd stumbled upon an unprecedented treasure, her persistence unwavering. Not interested, Ash replied flatly. My sister is a tailor. When I was little, I used to watch her work. Although Ash had no intention of engaging, Yubel, true to her word, continued to chatter without pause. Sen, observing from the side, was at a loss for words. She's actually talking to herself now. Don't make a fuss. I'm somewhat curious about her cutting techniques, Ash said, his tone calm as ever. Why not take the free knowledge? I might even try to resonate with her a little. If it doesn't work, I can always chase her away later. I've always thought you had a really bad personality, Sen muttered, utterly speechless. Yubel swayed slightly, flashing a disarmingly bright smile. That's too much. You've been planning to throw me away from the start? And you're not even trying to hide it. Of course. We're not acquainted, and you came here on your own. Why wouldn't I discard you after using what I need? Should I support you, too? I know you don't mean it like that, but why does this conversation sound so strange? Listening to their exchange, Sen felt that if he hadn't been paying attention, he might have misunderstood Ash as some heartless man. Lowering his voice, Sen leaned closer to Ash and whispered, "This person seems like trouble. She's the type who'll cling to you endlessly. It's better not to get too involved, don't you think?" What a coincidence. I thought the same at first, but... It's too late, Yubel interrupted, leaning between the two with a mischievous smile. I'm not someone who can be abandoned so easily. Her sudden intrusion startled Sen, making him take a few steps back. Ash, however, remained completely unfazed, his expression unchanged. Yubel, now seemingly accelerating her chatter in an attempt to deepen their connection, continued speaking enthusiastically. Meanwhile, Ash silently gazed into the distance, his thoughts elsewhere. He began to wonder why he was always surrounded by such strange people and why normal ones were so scarce. When Fern and Frieren returned to the group after helping out in the village and gathering supplies, they were greeted by an unusual sight. Sen stood off to the side, looking at Ash with a pained expression. Next to Ash was an unfamiliar girl, who appeared far too comfortable in her proximity to him. Master Ash, who is this person? Fern asked, frowning as her gaze landed on Yubel. Someone I don't know, Ash replied bluntly. Ah, that's too cruel, Yubel said with a teasing smile. We've been chatting for so long and gotten so close, yet you claim not to know me. She leaned in closer, her shoulder nearly brushing his. Hey, are you too close? Frieren asked, amused by the scene. Her curiosity got the better of her as she turned to Yubel. Who are you? Yubel. Hello. Yubel smiled brightly and extended her hand. But, just as Ash had done earlier, Frieren didn't take it. Instead, she scrutinized Yubel with a sharp gaze. You're the one who killed those bandits, aren't you? It was just self-defense, Yubel replied nonchalantly. As I thought, Frieren murmured. What's wrong? Fern asked, sensing the tension. Nothing, Frieren said curtly, brushing off the matter. She shifted her focus back to Yubel. What are you doing here? This person is fascinating, Yubel said cheerfully, gesturing toward Ash. But after chatting with him for a while, I realized he's even more interesting than I initially thought. Really? Yubel nodded slightly, her tone indifferent. Are you traveling too? Where are you headed? The magic city of Oberst. The first level magician exam is about to start there, and I wanted to see if any interesting people showed up. I didn't expect to meet someone so fascinating before even getting there. We were planning to go there too, Frieren replied. Oh my, what a coincidence. Can I go with you? I'm a little scared to travel alone. It doesn't matter. Frieren stared at Yubel for a long moment, clearly seeing through her, but she was too tired to bother exposing anything. Instead, she casually agreed. After all, there was no real reason to refuse. Having someone along the way to watch out for her wasn't necessarily a bad thing. However, Fern's expression turned slightly awkward. She seemed hesitant to speak but ultimately chose to remain silent. Sen, on the other hand, couldn't bear the situation any longer and covered his face. I don't care what happens next. Master Sen, have you ever been responsible for anything? I haven't, but why are you angry with me? Fern glanced sheepishly at Sen, then cast a pleading look at Ash, clearly hoping he would deal with the weirdo and resolve the issue. But Ash, as usual, ignored him. Let's get moving and try to reach the next village before nightfall, Ash said calmly. Although, at this point, I don't mind sleeping in the wilderness. With that, he stood up from the fence, brushed off his clothes, and started walking ahead without waiting for anyone else. Frieren, like Ash, didn't argue. She had thought it over and decided there was no harm in letting Yubel tag along. Besides, it wasn't as if they had anything better to do, and having someone unusual around might even make the journey more interesting. Ash, however, had his own reason for allowing Yubel to come along. He was genuinely looking forward to the moment when she realized she couldn't replicate his magic and that all her effort had been for nothing. Chapter 107, The Education of Yubel. After Yubel joined, the journey was still surprisingly peaceful. It's just that Yubel would ask the three of them about Ash from time to time, trying to see if they could resonate with him to create some powerful magic without ever seeing his magic. But Fern seemed to have misunderstood her intentions, so she basically didn't want to pay attention to her, and although Sen and Frieren could provide some information, it was only what they knew, which was not actually comprehensive. However, even if it is comprehensive, it is meaningless, because the essential structure determines that there is no hope, and even the existence of Saria cannot be an exception. However, the group was somewhat unlucky. After continuing to walk for a while after nightfall, they were still unable to reach the new village. As a result, they could only camp next to a small woods on the plain. It was on a night like this that Ash was sitting by a newly lit campfire reading a book, and Fern was much closer to him than usual, staring at him with her cheeks puffed up, as if she wanted him to pay more attention to her. But this silent gaze made Ash not know what to say, and he even instinctively wanted to avoid it. Frieren obviously didn't want to be involved, so she read silently without saying a word. Sen simply flipped through the holy books, pretending to be a pious priest. Yubel, on the other hand, smiled with great interest, stared at Ash with one hand on her chin, glanced at Fern, and said with a smile. It always feels like a little animal trying to show its ownership. What are you talking about? No, I just think you are all very interesting, and. Facing the serious look from Fern, Yubel looked at Frieren, who was still reading a book on the side with a smile on her face, and said, Fern gives people a very unfathomable feeling, and Frieren also gives off the feeling of a skilled old magician. Don't talk about old age. Upon hearing this, Frieren immediately closed the book, hugged her knees with her hands, and showed an unhappy expression. Ah! Isn't this a compliment? I hate word old. While speaking, Frieren turned her head to look at Ash, who seemed to be in a trance. By the way, I get angry when I think of this. Ash is also annoying. Why does this involve me at this time? Because you talk the most. Is this the top of the hate list? The elf girl was very emotional in this regard, and even started to act like she was in a bad mood. Ash was caught in the crossfire for no reason, but he could only sigh and sit next to her, reaching out to touch her silver hair. Good girl, you are actually still young, so forget those things quickly. Don't touch my head, and don't treat me like a child. Frieren stretched out her hand and pushed him away. Although she was still staring at him, her displeasure seemed to be stronger than before. Or, not as strong? To be honest, he didn't quite understand it. He was just frustrated that Frieren was already an elderly person, so why was she still so troublesome? Can't treat her as a child, can't treat her as an old senior? In the end, she just wants to be in the middle? She looks like a child, but she's an old woman, but she doesn't look like a young adult. Why is she so willful? These weird companions made Ash couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. Yubel, on the other hand, had been observing his every move throughout the process, and when her eyes swept over the remaining two magicians, the corners of her mouth couldn't help but rise. It was only after she actually joined the group that she realized this was truly a treasure team. Except for the priest, she had no chance of defeating anyone in the group. Although she hadn't taken action, her intuition told her that each of these three magicians was far more powerful than any magician she had ever encountered. This realization led her to conclude that, while observing Ash, she should also take the opportunity to get to know Fern and Frieren better, to see if they could resonate and produce unique magic. Continuing northward, although there was more time for personal conversations, the atmosphere within the group felt slightly off compared to usual. But overall, there wasn't much difference. Sen, who had been asking around along the way, finally learned from some roadside villagers about an old woman who called herself the Stubborn Grandma. She had a very close relationship with her best friend, a guerrilla warrior, and was likely to know information about their destination. To obtain this information, the group ended up being ordered around by the Stubborn Grandma. To avoid making things worse, Ash was assigned the task of delivering a letter. When he returned from delivering the letter to the next village, he noticed the other four had followed the old woman deeper into the canyon. This made him shake his head and sigh as he caught up. He glanced at Yubel, who had somehow become quite familiar with Fern and the others, and couldn't help but laugh. You've turned into free labor. Everything makes sense, and I've gained a lot of information, Yubel replied smugly. Really? Then keep working hard. Seeing Yubel's smug expression, Ash held back his laughter, patted her on the head, and quickly walked ahead of the group. At the end of the canyon, they unexpectedly came across two moss-covered stone statues. One of them was Craft. He looked at the statues more closely and recognized the elf depicted in one of them. The old woman behind him was surprised when she heard his exclamation. What? You actually know them? It's said they were heroes who saved the world a long time ago. That long ago? As expected of an elf, they can still survive. He had never imagined that the monk Craft had saved the world. However, when Sen overheard their conversation, he pointed excitedly at the other statue. That elf is Craft, but what about this one? Who is this person? The other one? That human has long since died, so how could he possibly know her? Well, that's true. But that human looks a lot like you. Could she be your idol? If you meet Craft again, I'll ask him for you. No, it's just, there's actually a pair of stone statues like this in our village, so. Sen shook his head and began recounting a story from his past. He and his best friend, accompanied by Hater, had once admired a similar statue. To avoid being forgotten like the stone hero, his best friend had named himself the guerrilla warrior, and Hater had nicknamed him the bearded priest. Speaking of which, what's the name of your best friend? Ash asked. He had heard Sen mention his best friend many times and had even seen photos taken with magic, but he had never heard the man's name. His curiosity finally got the better of him. The question left Sen stunned. Name. He stroked his beard and pondered for a long time but couldn't figure it out. At this point, even Yubel couldn't help but complain expressionlessly, is he really your best friend? No. This isn't my fault. He's always had people call him that and has always referred to himself that way. After so many years, the name Guerrilla Warrior is so deeply rooted in my mind that I honestly can't remember his real name. Sen looked embarrassed as he tried to defend himself. But honestly, if others hadn't witnessed his persistent search along the way, they might really doubt whether his relationship with this friend was close enough to call them best friends. Ash didn't continue teasing and instead observed the statue, nodding unconsciously. This statue is well preserved. It's a stone statue, after all. Yubel smiled, resting her forearm on his shoulder and staring at his face from the side. Why, do you also want to be someone like this? A hero who saves the world? Talk to me about it. Actually, a long time ago, there was also a stone statue of me in the south. Hey, really? Let's put that aside for now, Ash replied, brushing off her curiosity, and turned his attention to Sen and asked. Even if we know the nickname, what's the point if the real name has been forgotten? Isn't this putting the cart before the horse from the start? Instead of using a strange name to make others remember you and avoid being forgotten, wouldn't it have been better to carve the name directly on the base of the statue? That way, the name would remain in history, and the glory you created could be preserved as well. You actually thought of that? Sen's mouth fell open, stunned. He looked at Ash, then at the intact statue, and after a long pause, he cast an incredulous look at him. Are you, a genius? No. Actually, I'm more confused as to why you and your friend didn't think of it. You wanted people to remember you so badly, yet you didn't even bother to put your names on the statue. And now, you've forgotten your best friend's name. I told you when we first met that he's a simple-minded, muscular gorilla, didn't I? What about you? Speaking of which, this is the last task from the stubborn grandma. Once I finish this, she'll tell me where that guy went. Let's get to work quickly. Sen very deliberately pretended not to hear, bent down to wet a rag, and silently started cleaning the statue. The others just shook their heads at the sight, choosing not to comment. Without saying a word, they quietly stepped forward to help clean the statue. For the moment, they didn't even know how to complain about the two of them. Just like before, Ash didn't participate in the delicate chore. Instead, he stood by and watched alongside the stubborn grandma. Seeing this, Yubel sat down next to him, her ever-present smile unchanged. She looked at him curiously and asked, "You're not going to join? If I were to clean that kind of stone statue, if I used too much force while wiping, it might break." "Oh, that's really scary." Yubel placed her index finger on her lips, nodding as if something had come to mind. "Come to think of it, you're a magician, but you have such great strength? It seems you've undergone warrior training as well." "You have it, too. It's just some basics, and it's within the scope of a magician." Yubel elegantly superimposed her left leg on her right leg and asked with a smile, "But, by the way, your companions are probably going to leave soon, what do you think?" "Why should I answer your question?" Ash responded calmly. "So what if I let you see my panties again? I've seen it twice, what else is there to watch?" Today's style is different from the previous ones. Yubel's cheeks blushed slightly, and she lifted the hem of her skirt slightly. This reluctant look seemed quite tempting, but in fact she had already made preparations in secret and would call for help immediately if he really dared to make a move. However, Ash had no intention of taking direct action as he had done before. On the contrary, he showed a little surprise, stared at Yubel, and said, "Yubel, you..." "What?" Yubel asked calmly. "Are you a nympho?" Note, nympho, a woman with very strong sexual desires. "Hey? No." Ash's inexplicably serious gaze almost made Yubel's mouth twist with anger. Although it was a test by herself, she couldn't help but grit her teeth and tell the real purpose, "This is just a test. If you really want to see it, I will call for help. But if I really lift it up, won't I see it again? Are you really okay? Don't care." You really didn't expect that?" He observed the girl's expression gradually stiffening and her head turning away for a while, then grabbed her ponytail and manipulated her to look at him again. You obviously have a very good talent for magic, so don't always let your impulses control your actions. Although I understand that you are an overly emotional and irrational guy, after all, even the use of magic is almost the same. You already understand everything, why are you still talking about this now? I just want to tell you that being too eager for revenge or being blinded by anger and hatred will not have a good result. Even if you want to deal with me, please calm down. After all, when will revenge end? Why not be more generous and forget the past conflicts? Although you look like a role model and what you said seems to make sense, why are you grabbing my hair and saying this?" Yubel forced out a somewhat scary smile. "Isn't this convenient? It's like, yeah, it's just like a handle. Hey." Yubel tried to keep a smile that was about to break, and in the next moment, she punched him in the face, "Go to hell." However, before her fist landed, Ash had already grabbed her wrist, then he held her ponytail with one hand and controlled her wrist with the other, pinning her down on his legs. "Ah! Let me go." She tried to struggle, but to no avail. "No, you've walked into this trap yourself, so you can't blame me." Ash pressed Yubel on his lap, patting her upper exposed, smooth, fair back with one hand, and resting his elbow on her soft hips with his other hand. He rested his chin on his hand and looked at the busy crowd in the distance, yawning lazily. "It's such a nice day today, the sun is shining, the blanket is warm, and the cushion is soft, why don't we find a place to take a nap later?" Yubel was treated as a free self-heating blanket that also served as a support pad to relieve elbow pressure. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't get free. She wanted to seek help but was hesitant. After all, she looked too miserable now. Next to the two of them, the stubborn grandma opened her mouth wide and looked at them with a shocked expression. It was really shocking to them from the very beginning to the very end. Chapter 107.5, The Accumulated Feelings of Fern. The Moment of Parting. At first, the grandma just found it a little hard to believe that young people nowadays could be so outrageous and play so wildly. In the end, seeing Yubel being used as a tool, she unconsciously moved to the side, fearing she might get involved with them. Or worse, she might be dragged into a strange dispute by this peculiar pair of individuals. As the sun gradually set and the stone statue was nearly dealt with, Fern finally couldn't hold back anymore. She walked up to the two of them, staring coldly at Ash. "Master Ash, what are you doing? Are you bullying her? Can you explain this to me? She wanted to hit me, so I subdued her. I was just afraid of being beaten and retaliated against, so I kept suppressing her like this." "That's probably the situation," Ash replied nonchalantly. "I'm sorry. I don't understand what you're saying. Can you explain it in detail?" Ash smiled slightly and patted Yubel on the back of her head. "By the way, during this process, you were dealing with the statue, and I was dealing with her filthy heart. Teaching her the truth about revenge is also a way to enlighten her, so that she can let go of old conflicts and embrace a new life." Although Fern looked visibly angry, Ash acted like a wise priest, providing what he believed was a clear explanation at least in his mind. This humiliation only strengthened Yubel's determination to take revenge someday, but she still managed to force a dark smile onto her face. "When you taught me this, I wanted to know from the beginning, would you forgive those who brought such humiliation upon you? You still don't understand, Yubel." "What? You've heard of teachers who teach people how to do business, right? Although they teach others how to do business, why don't you think they run businesses themselves? Of course, some may have been in business, but among their students, there will always be those who surpass them. Do you understand what I mean?" "I don't know. What I mean is, I actually have high hopes for you." Ash smiled kindly and stroked the hair of the girl on his lap. Judging by his demeanor, he truly looked like a kind and virtuous elder, someone who sincerely hoped for the younger generation to surpass him. But, it was hard to ignore Yubel's murderous expression. Fern's expression on the side was equally icy, which made Sen and Frieren decide to stay out of it. They didn't want to be dragged into the mess and end up with more trouble than it was worth. Just as the atmosphere was becoming increasingly tense, the stubborn grandma finally couldn't hold herself back. She clapped her hands and interrupted their strange conversation. "We've already said this is the last commission. If you're still interested in where the guerrilla warrior is, I'll tell you." "Of course I'm very interested. Come on, tell me, you stubborn old woman." Ash, still at the center of the storm, stood up without hesitation. With an urgent look on his face, he pulled the stubborn old woman aside. The girl who had been sitting on his lap was unceremoniously thrown off when he stood up, rolling over and landing on the ground with a loud wow. The treatment was so harsh that Yubel could no longer contain herself. She stared at his back with lifeless eyes, resembling a vengeful spirit. This made Ash briefly wonder if he should be a little gentler with her. But, if he thought about it from the beginning, had he really done anything wrong? He felt a bit uncertain and couldn't shake the feeling that he was in the right. After all, as a self-proclaimed feminist, wasn't he already doing the right thing? Just like that, after a brief brainstorming session, Ash simply gave up on the matter concerning Yubel and happily turned his attention to the information about the guerrilla warrior. Although, in truth, he had no particular interest in the guerrilla for the time being. After gathering the necessary information, the group did not leave the village immediately. They bid farewell to the stubborn grandma and arrived at the village entrance, only to pause there and delay their departure. Among them, Sen, who had learned the whereabouts of his best friend, did not show the joy he had felt when he first received the clue. Instead, he seemed somewhat melancholy. There was a reason for this. Although the guerrilla had initially headed north, following roughly the same route as theirs, the stubborn old woman explained that he had departed from this village, taking a fork in the road, and traveled to a trading city in the central part of the northern countries. Their destination was the magic city in the southern part of the northern continent, while the trading city was located in the central region of the north. In other words, to catch up with the guerrilla, they would need to head east from here, which meant... "What should I do?" Sen muttered, sitting at the fork in the road at the village entrance and staring at the paths that branched off in two directions. This wine-drinking, meat-loving priest now displayed a rare moment of sadness. Yubel, however, seemed puzzled. Why are you so worried? It's just a choice between two options. You can easily make a decision, can't you? Just shut up. I've never met anyone worse at reading the mood than you. Ash slapped Yubel lightly on the head, pushing the peculiar girl behind him. To be honest, whenever he looked at her, he often wondered whether she was the demon or if he was the demon. Though no one knew why he had just shooed Yubel away, everyone's eyes were fixed on him, as if he had said something out of place. In the end, however, they remained silent. Only Fern broke the awkward atmosphere with a sigh and a shake of her head. The sun is about to set. We should stay in the village for the night. It won't hurt to decide tomorrow. The sun isn't setting that much yet. If we hurry, we might make it to the next. Ash began, but Fern interrupted with a heavier tone. Master Ash, come with me. I have something I want to discuss with you. Why? Normally, you're the one who's most concerned about time. After all, when it comes to situations like this, you should make a decision quickly to avoid confusion. If you hesitate now, you'll only suffer later. Instead of agonizing over it, it's better to decide immediately, which is good for everyone. Otherwise, you'll... Master Ash. Now is not the time for your reasoning. While what you're saying does make sense, right now please just shut up and come with me, okay? Fern forced a smile, but the lack of warmth in her eyes made Ash inexplicably want to flee the scene. Unfortunately, before he could act on that impulse, Fern firmly grabbed him and dragged him away. The others at the scene remained silent. Frieren simply patted Sen on the shoulder before following Fern and Ash, with Yubel trailing behind. Sen, left alone, continued sitting on the stone, staring at the fork in the road. Blowing smoke rings, he remained silent for a long time. As night fell, the air grew noticeably colder. Sen went to the village chief to borrow a vacant house, while Ash accompanied Fern to buy ingredients for dinner. When Ash returned with the ingredients, Fern, who had been in charge of selecting them, sighed and began to lecture him. Master Ash, can you be more tactful when speaking and consider other people's feelings? I was thinking about it, so that's why I came to that conclusion, right? So you dislike Lord Sen? Why would I? Isn't he quite interesting? Ash's response was straightforward, and Fern could see that he bore no ill intentions. What he had said before did seem to make sense, after all. But it was precisely because of this that it gave her a headache. She wanted to say more, but Ash smiled and used one hand to pat her head gently. But Fern has grown up, and now she knows how to care about other people's feelings. How amazing! Please don't treat me like a child, it makes me feel sleepy. Wait a minute. Before she could finish, Ash suddenly grabbed her hand, causing her to shrink back instinctively. What are you doing? Of course, I want to see if your hands are cold. What else could I do? Ash didn't let go, instead feeling the warmth in his palm and nodding. They're really cold. Your skirt doesn't have pockets, so how about putting your hands in my pockets? Isn't that a strange posture? It does seem a bit strange. Why not one hand holding mine while the other is in my pocket? Well, thank you. Standing on his left side, Fern hesitated for a moment before softly saying, thank you. She then stretched out her left hand, allowing him to hold it, and quietly slipped it into his pocket without making a sound. Although the posture was still a bit odd, the warmth transmitted from his palm made Fern unconsciously smile. Her heart also felt inexplicably warm, and she found herself quietly watching his profile from the side. It was just a gust of cold wind, but she couldn't help but look at him carrying a large bag of food, his hands exposed to the chill. She said worriedly. Master Ash, why don't you let me carry some of it for a while? No need, I'm not at the point where you need to worry about me yet. But, if I let you do all the work and things, I'll... These are things adults should do. You don't need to worry about them. I'm not a child anymore. It seems so. But this is the responsibility of a man, right? He thought for a moment and gave a different answer with a smile. This answer made Fern smile again, but she couldn't help but ask, didn't you always emphasize to Yubel that you're a feminist? Why do you and Yubel always say the same thing? What's different? Everything is different. After all, Fern is special. The response came without hesitation, and it was also what Ash truly thought. However, this casual answer made Fern's expression and gaze freeze slightly. Although the air was still cold, her heart inexplicably surged with a warmth far greater than before, causing her cheeks to heat uncontrollably, and even her heartbeat to accelerate involuntarily. She didn't understand why she suddenly couldn't continue to look directly at that familiar face. Instead, she instinctively averted her gaze, only pursing her lips from time to time and secretly glancing at the person next to her, who still looked completely normal. As if reflecting this subtle emotion, the dim sky began to gently drop snowflakes at this moment. The lightly falling snowflakes added a touch of romance and fantasy to this moment. The girl tried to calm herself down, but the throbbing in her heart was like a flame touched by snowflakes. Instead of being extinguished, it burned even more vigorously. She opened her mouth to say something but hesitated, afraid to upset the delicate balance between them. Instead, she hid her emotions deep within, letting them quietly accumulate like snowflakes in her heart. Ash, on the other hand, was oblivious to her inner turmoil. Watching a snowflake land on his nose, he smiled at the girl beside him. If the snow gets heavy tonight, let's take a break tomorrow and build a snowman or something before we leave, he suggested casually. He clearly hadn't noticed the subtle changes in Fern. However, Fern wasn't angry. She took a deep breath, suppressing her emotions and allowing his words to take root in her heart like a seed. With a bright smile, she nodded vigorously. Yes. Let's build a big snowman together. Back at the cabin. When they returned to the cabin, Frieren had already spread out the bedding for everyone and was gazing out the window at the falling snow. When Ash appeared beside her, she smiled and remarked, "You're surprisingly gentlemanly at times. Why are you saying that all of a sudden?" He replied, raising an eyebrow. "Is it cold?" she asked, her tone light. "What do you think?" Ash stretched out his hand, which had been exposed to the cold for a while. Frieren casually took it in hers, her eyes widening slightly in surprise as she sighed. "Oh, this might be a record breaker. It really gets colder the farther north we go. What exactly is your relationship?" Yubel, squatting by the stove, asked bluntly, glancing between the two of them. "Friends," Frieren answered without hesitation. Yubel frowned in confusion. "Is this what normal friends do? Well, maybe we're very good friends? Or maybe we're friends who are only good friends occasionally," Frieren added, sounding unsure herself. Ash lightly tapped Frieren's forehead with his fingertips, giving up on trying to make sense of the situation. Even Sen, who had just walked in, seemed puzzled. However, his strength lay in not caring about things he didn't understand. With a cheerful mood, he joined them by the window, looking out at the snow. "I just cleaned up, and now it's snowing again," he sighed. "I hope it doesn't turn into a snowstorm." "That would be troublesome," Ash said, pulling his hand away from Frieren's. "It's not a big deal," Frieren replied with a smile. "We're not crossing steep mountains this time, so even a little snow won't hurt." The next morning. In the early hours of the next day, everyone woke up to a sudden snowstorm. The sky was a blinding white, the wind biting and relentless. Traveling was out of the question, let alone building a snowman. As expected, they were trapped in the village. Fortunately, this time they were in a place with plenty of supplies, so there was no need to worry about food or shelter. With ample time left before the first-class magician assessment, no one felt rushed. Even Sen, who usually carried a sense of urgency, seemed relieved. As the days slowly passed, everyone busied themselves with various tasks. Ash seemed especially preoccupied, occasionally disappearing for a few days at a time. Before they knew it, the cold wave began to subside. On the last night of their stay, marking the end of spring, they prepared to set out again. At the village tavern, Sen sat at a table, discussing the future with Ash. There was no one else in the team he could share such conversations with. The two of them often ended up drinking together, talking about their older sister or other shared topics. But this time, they weren't talking about that. Chapter 108, Frieren's understanding the source of all evil. Ash? Sen, his expression more serious than usual, took a few puffs from his cigarette before hesitantly addressing the boy sitting across from him. "Ash, what do you think I am?" Before he could finish, Ash interrupted him, sounding both exasperated and dismissive. "There's nothing to worry about. Didn't you make it clear when you first joined us that you were just tagging along to catch up with that gorilla? Or are you planning to regret it for another 10 years? "True," Sen admitted, though his tone carried a hint of frustration. "But you're so blunt about these things. You don't even try to be tactful. What's wrong with that? Being indecisive isn't exactly a virtue, is it? Sure, that's true, but... Sen trailed off, exhaling a long puff of smoke as he gave a bitter smile. No matter how you look at it, you're a bit too cold. If I didn't know you as well as I do, I'd think you were some heartless, bloodless guy. Ash waved his hand to disperse the smoke, speaking casually. I've said it before, if you don't make a decision when you should, you'll just end up regretting it. Life's a journey of repeated encounters and reunions. As long as you're alive, there's always a chance to meet again. So why be sad? When that time comes, just tell me your story again. My story? Sen looked momentarily stunned before recalling their first meeting. A smile crept onto his face. Oh, that's right. Seriously, though, next time, can you not just stand there watching the show? Save me sooner. That depends on how interesting your story is, Ash replied with a grin, raising his glass. Sen clinked his glass against Ash's, laughing boldly. Do I even need to say it? That gorilla and I are going to become heroes remembered throughout history. The gorilla can just stay the gorilla, but I'll make sure my name is carved at the base of the statue so you can bow before it. Really? Then I'll be looking forward to that day. When it happens, you'd better introduce me to a mature and sexy older sister. A mature and sexy older sister? What? Something wrong with that? No, it's just... Oh, never mind. Sen hesitated, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form a response. In the end, he chose silence, though his expression betrayed a mix of confusion and frustration. Ash, meanwhile, looked at him with a face full of question marks, which only made Sen feel even more inexplicably anxious and irritated. Yet, he couldn't find a way to vent this strange feeling. Sen couldn't stand Ash's attitude, nor could he ignore the dynamic between Ash and Fern. Though he was technically an outsider, he couldn't help but feel restless and agitated, as if their unresolved tension was his own burden to bear. Watching from the sidelines was unbearable. So, when Frieren was alone in the bookstore, enjoying her last night surrounded by the comforting sea of books, Sen suddenly burst in, shouting, Frieren! Hey? What? What's going on? Frieren, deeply engrossed in her reading, was startled by the sudden outburst and turned toward him in surprise. You saw it earlier, didn't you? Sen took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, though his excitement bled into his words. Ash and Fern, they were holding hands. And Fern even put her other hand in Ash's pocket. Yes, I saw it. So what? Frieren tilted her head, utterly baffled by the priest's sudden frenzy. Are you drunk? Or is it illegal to put your hand in someone else's pocket in this country? Or maybe holding hands is against the law now? Her calm and genuinely confused response left Sen momentarily speechless. No. Sen waved his hand dramatically, his excitement causing him to slap the desk. I'm leaving soon, and I really can't stand this anymore. You've decided to leave. Frieren tilted her head slightly before smiling. But, what about it? Sen, do you regret this journey? Not at all. It's been a blast. Then why don't you just come with us? Frieren leaned forward, her expression curious. But, you seem a little upset. Is there something you're not telling me? Because this isn't something I can say right now. Sen's frustration boiled over, and he slammed his hands on the table, his voice rising in despair. After everything I just said, you don't have any other thoughts? What did you just say? It's not about breaking the law. If it's not illegal, then... Frieren paused, her brows furrowing as she appeared deep in thought. Her expression shifted to one of seriousness. I understand. I'll save up some money. Hey! When I've saved enough, I'll buy Fern a dress with pockets in the skirt. Frieren sighed deeply, as though she had reached a profound conclusion. Her determination to save some private funds was clear in her voice. Sen was dumbfounded. He stared at her in disbelief, utterly speechless. After a long pause, he finally managed to ask, what are you even talking about? Aren't you upset because it's uncomfortable not to have pockets? And you're also subtly criticizing me for not working hard and choosing the wrong clothes for Fern, right? Frieren shook her head, her tone carrying an odd mix of regret and pride. Actually, I'm not as slow as you think. I can pick up on things like this now. You picked up on that? Of course. I've improved a lot over the years. Frieren puffed out her chest with pride, clearly pleased with herself. She genuinely believed her ability to pick up on subtle hints had grown significantly. After all, in the past, she would have completely missed such details. At least now, she could identify differences in others and recognize key points to address. But Sen's expression was a mix of disbelief and pain. He looked as though he'd swallowed a fly or worse, as if he were battling severe constipation. Words seemed to catch in his throat, leaving him unable to articulate his frustration. His pained expression was so exaggerated that even Frieren began to feel a bit of sympathy for him. Smiling, she stood on tiptoe and gently patted his head. "You're such a drunkard," she said warmly. "Even though you look like this, you're happier about my growth than I am. It's really rare." "Is this a happy expression?" Sen muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're crying with joy, aren't you?" Frieren continued, completely missing his tone. "Ash said that sometimes, when people are overwhelmed with happiness, they cry. And when they're too happy, they might even show a pained expression. This is called, right, things turning into their opposites when they reach their extremes, isn't it?" She nodded to herself, clearly proud of her ability to recall and apply Ash's teachings. Sen, however, couldn't summon a single word of praise. Instead, he tilted his head back, gazing up at the sky at a 45-degree angle. Taking a long drag from his cigarette, he exhaled slowly and muttered in a voice filled with despair. "It would be better to destroy this world." Why was she like this? Was it because she was an elf? No, that wasn't it. It had to be Ash's bad influence. But if that were true, why was Fern so normal while the oldest elf had turned out like this? Sen's thoughts spiraled into chaos. For the first time, he found himself genuinely worried about the future of their team. Except for the youngest, Fern, none of the other three could be considered normal. This left Sen completely at a loss. Even if he wanted to say something or give instructions, he didn't know how to phrase it or who to direct it to. On the eve of their departure, Sen clearly wanted to tell Frieren something. Yet, in the end, the words didn't come. Instead, he found himself worrying that if Frieren stayed with the group any longer, Ash would teach her even more bizarre things. Although he couldn't be entirely certain that Ash was the source of all this chaos, 9 times out of 10, it seemed likely, didn't it? The next day, the heavy snow finally stopped. Sen, looking somewhat troubled, said a brief farewell to everyone before setting off on a different path. His strange expression as he departed left Fern feeling uneasy. Watching his figure grow smaller in the distance, she unconsciously tugged on Ash's sleeve. Master Sen looked so strange, but he said there's nothing wrong with his body. "Is he really okay?" "He's a priest," Ash replied, his tone casual. "If anyone's good at curing illnesses and saving lives, it's him. It's odd for you to worry about his health. I think he's just preoccupied with something. But as far as I remember, he was fine when he left the tavern last night." "Ah, I saw that uncle head to the bookstore," Yubel chimed in, turning her head thoughtfully. "He must have chatted with Frieren for a while. When he came back, his expression was super weird." Suddenly thrust into the spotlight, Frieren crossed her arms and touched her chin, mumbling to herself. "Yesterday, he seemed to think it was pitiful that Fern didn't have pockets. He kept hinting that I should buy her a skirt with pockets." "What's this? That uncle's so attentive." Yubel's eyes widened in surprise, and her tone carried newfound respect for Sen's apparent concern. Frieren, however, appeared even more distressed. "I didn't think he'd care about something like that to this extent. Maybe I should have been more certain last night. Should I have just promised him? Is it pitiful not to have pockets?" Fern looked down at her skirt, blinking in confusion. After a moment, she shook her head vigorously. "I don't mind. No, actually, I think it's better this way. This is some kind of stubborn aesthetic or a strange sense of direction, isn't it?" Frieren pondered this for a long time before suddenly exclaiming, "Come to think of it, Sen's obsession with finding a big sister is so odd that even someone like me can't approve of it. Maybe now he's fixated on the idea that all girls must have skirts with pockets. That uncle is way too nosy," Yubel grumbled, clearly annoyed by this theory. The three of them continued their discussion, their voices growing animated, while Ash stood to the side, unable to get a single word in. Meanwhile, Sen, who hadn't yet walked far, overheard every word of their unconcealed conversation. He almost stumbled into the snow, his steps faltering. He could never have imagined that last night's conversation would lead to such a ridiculous conclusion. His reputation, he felt, had been thoroughly ruined by Frieren, worse even than anything Ash could have done. But as strange as it all seemed, he didn't dare look back. Instead, he quickened his pace, his face tinged with both frustration and resignation. In his heart, he blamed Ash for corrupting Frieren, firmly believing him to be the source of her eccentricities. Determined to escape this chaotic group, Sen resolved to revisit them only when Frieren had matured and gained a clearer understanding of things. Surely, by then, it would be easier to explain everything. Back at the group, Ash, who had been inexplicably glared at before Sen left, stood there feeling completely innocent. He scratched his head, bewildered. "I didn't even say anything this time," he muttered to himself. "So why am I the one getting hated? It's already hard enough to guess a girl's thoughts, so why is it that even an uncle's thoughts have become incomprehensible now? Or, does Sen have a delicate mind like a girl?" Ash, who had been left staring blankly after Sen's earlier glare, felt utterly bewildered. Still, he was managing. The one who felt the most confused in the team, however, was Yubel. After spending an entire winter with the group, Yubel had tried her best to understand the three of them. But for some reason, despite their obvious strength, their resonance couldn't produce any powerful magic. Ash offered no explanation, and Frieren admitted outright that while she knew many spells, she wasn't particularly skilled or specialized in any of them. Fern, for her part, confessed that she didn't have any unique magic either, her specialty was ordinary attack magic. This left Yubel utterly baffled. Were they lying to her? It didn't seem like it, but how could such strong individuals lack anything truly exceptional? That said, it wasn't as though her efforts had yielded no results. During their attempts at resonance over the past months, Yubel had discovered something peculiar. While her progress in other areas was stagnant, her ability to converge magic power was improving significantly. Sure, Ash teased her constantly, but in exchange, she'd gained stronger and more effective magic power convergence. Was it worth it? "There's no visible fluctuation in my magic power," Yubel muttered to herself one day as the group prepared to set off again. "Why am I even trying to suppress my magic power if nothing's wrong with it?" Walking at the back of the group, she began to doubt her own talent. Still, after investing so much time, she couldn't bring herself to give up. With a heavy sigh, she picked up her pace and caught up with the others. The cold wave had passed, and the blizzards were no more. Following Sen's departure, the remaining four resumed their journey. The northern land was harsh, its winds icy and unrelenting. Even the sheep bred here were accustomed to the cold. One night, as the group took shelter in a cave, they enjoyed the warmth of a fire and a much-needed rest. After a hot bath, Fern, like Frieren, overslept the next morning. "No, something seems off," Ash muttered as he returned from gathering firewood. Looking at Fern, who was bundled tightly in her blankets, her face unusually flushed and her breathing labored, he quickly realized something was wrong. Without thinking, he reached out to touch her face. Fern's body jolted as if struck by lightning. Her eyes fluttered open, and she gazed at him with a mixture of resentment and confusion. In a weak voice, she murmured, "Master Ash, what are you doing?" "I was checking your temperature." "With such cold hands." "My mistake. I'm sorry." Ash apologized awkwardly, then turned to place his hands on Yubel and Frieren's faces in turn. Yubel, startled by the cold, snapped her eyes open and glared at him. "What are you doing? Don't do that, mm." Compared to Yubel's fiery reaction, Frieren was surprisingly docile. She mumbled a soft complaint, shook her head like a sleepy caterpillar, and burrowed deeper into her quilt. The two completely different responses left Ash looking sheepish. He glanced at Yubel, who was now fully awake. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I just wanted to see who I could wake up first." "Are you really apologizing?" Yubel asked, her voice dripping with skepticism. She'd never heard such an insincere apology in her life. Sorry." Chapter 108.5, The Sickly Girl is not considered a human being? Although Yubel still felt that Ash's apology lacked sincerity, she didn't expect much from him in the first place. With her chin resting on one hand, she gave him an impatient look, urging him to explain himself. "Fern might be sick. Check her temperature for me." "My hands are too cold to do it," Ash said, trying to sound earnest. "Honestly, isn't this favoritism a bit too obvious?" Yubel raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. As an apology, how about we have a proper chat once we reach the magic city? Would that make it better? Ash offered, a small grin tugging at his lips. This is acceptable, let's leave it at that. Even though the reward was just a conversation, Yubel's irritation quickly transformed into joy. After all, her primary goal in joining this team was to have meaningful discussions with them. Her task was straightforward. She extended her warm hand and placed it on Fern's forehead. After a moment, she nodded thoughtfully. She does have a fever, Yubel confirmed. As expected. But is it just a cold, or could it be something more serious? Ash asked, his brow furrowed in concern. How should I know? Yubel shrugged helplessly, then gestured toward the others. Just as Ash was about to check Frieren's face next, Frieren suddenly sat up and protested weakly. Wait! I'm already awake. Ash paused, caught off guard, but before he could respond, Frieren opened her eyes and grabbed his cold hand, stopping him in his tracks. Although she wasn't thrilled about being woken up so early, Frieren had overheard their conversation in her groggy state and couldn't fall back asleep. With a resigned sigh, she reluctantly climbed out of the not-so-warm bed. Picking up her holy book from the previous night, she used simple goddess magic to diagnose Fern's condition. It's just a common cold, Frieren concluded after a moment. But we need to move to a warmer place soon, or her symptoms might worsen. She also needs medicine. The goddess's magic couldn't cure diseases, it could only diagnose them. Still, as Frieren spoke, a nostalgic expression crossed her face. She turned to Ash with a faint smile. Now that I think about it, I once fell ill in this area, and you took care of me back then, she said softly. That's true, Ash replied, nodding. I remember catching a cold near here. When I woke up, I was already in the magic city, Frieren continued, her voice filled with curiosity. But how did I get to the magic city? Frieren asked, her expression puzzled. Ash remained silent for a moment, her question drawing his thoughts back to an old, dusty memory. About 80 years ago. When Frieren suddenly caught a cold and developed a fever, the hero team found themselves completely helpless. No matter how much Hater, their healer, was favored by the goddess, healing magic couldn't cure illnesses. None of them were familiar with the area. They debated whether they should find a nearby place to warm up and then search for medicine or carry Frieren on someone's back to the magic city and look for treatment there. Marching with a feverish patient was risky, but what if they couldn't find medicine or shelter nearby? It could spell disaster. While the group continued their heated discussion without reaching a conclusion, Ash silently stepped forward. Without a word, he reached out and gently lifted Frieren, still curled up in her portable quilt. Ash, what are you doing? Frieren asked weakly, her eyes fluttering open as she tried to make sense of the situation. Ash smiled softly and reassured her, it's okay. Just close your eyes and rest for a while. You'll be fine soon. Frieren didn't fully understand what Ash was planning, but out of trust, she closed her eyes obediently. And then, under the stunned gazes of everyone, the defenseless girl in his arms was swiftly petrified. In the blink of an eye, she turned into a stone statue. Himmel froze, his mouth slightly agape, unable to process what had just happened. Even the usually stoic Eisen was so shocked his mind went blank. What are you doing? Hater stammered, his face pale. Their bewildered reactions made Ash sigh, his tone almost teasing as he complained, what's with your reactions? Considering the uncertainty of her condition, wouldn't this be the safest approach? This way, Frieren won't feel any discomfort, and we can head straight to the city for medicine. Isn't that the most effective and convenient solution? It might be convenient, but there are some serious issues with this approach, don't you think? Himmel said, pinching the bridge of his nose as if trying to stave off a headache. Even though we're close to the magic city, it'll still take a few days to get there, right? Carrying a stone statue the entire way would slow us down, Hater added, his expression a mix of disbelief and resignation. Ash raised an eyebrow and countered, if we travel at full speed, we can make it in half a day. That's true for someone like you or Eisen. But I'm a priest, not a warrior, and I'd be the one carrying her. Do you think I can manage that in half a day? Hater's voice rose in exasperation. Look. Before Hater could finish his argument, Ash casually cast a spell, causing the petrified Frieren to float in midair. With a slight push, he guided her suspended form toward the cave entrance. Then, without waiting for a response, he dashed out, the floating statue trailing behind him like a balloon. The others stood frozen, watching the bizarre scene unfold. They exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions growing stranger by the second. Rationally speaking, Ash's method was the safest and most efficient way to ensure Frieren's condition didn't worsen. However, the sight of him pushing a floating stone statue up a snowy slope like a makeshift sled was anything but dignified. Eventually, the group collectively decided to neither object nor comment. They silently turned their backs, each pretending not to see the ridiculous sight. With their tacit approval, Ash accelerated, the floating Frieren bobbing slightly with every step he took. Occasionally, when he hit an incline, the statue would lift into the air, only for Ash to catch it effortlessly and continue on his way. From their vantage point at the cave entrance, the others could see his silhouette shrinking in the distance. The sight of the stone statue bouncing and floating behind him like an oversized balloon was surreal, to say the least. Himmel and Eisen stayed behind, their slower pace matching Hader's. They stood silently, watching the scene unfold with a mix of amusement and bewilderment. I think I finally understand why Ash, despite being handsome, strong, and admired by so many, has never succeeded romantically, Hader muttered, adjusting his glasses as he averted his gaze. The others lowered their heads, suppressing their laughter. The three reached a silent agreement. For Frieren's sake and their friendship, it was best to keep the truth of this incident to themselves. Meanwhile, away from the others. Once he was out of sight, Ash stopped holding back. With no need to hide his abilities, he simply lifted the petrified Frieren into the air and soared toward the magic city. It took him just over an hour to reach his destination. After finding an inn, he gently placed the statue down in a corner of the room. He then purchased the medicine Hader had mentioned and enlisted the help of a local pharmacist to prepare it. After returning, Ash released the petrification spell on Frieren. This is... Hey? The ceiling. Frieren, still feverish and groggy, stared blankly at the unfamiliar ceiling above her. Her already sluggish brain seemed to grind to a halt, struggling to process her surroundings. Oh, Frieren, you're finally awake? Ash asked, feigning concern as he reached out and lightly grasped her feverishly warm hand. So cold. Frieren instinctively recoiled from his icy touch, glaring at him with a mix of frustration and helplessness. You bastard, just wait. The next time you're sick, I'll grab your hand with my freezing cold hands too, she muttered, her voice tinged with playful resentment. Ah, sorry, Ash said, scratching his head apologetically. He had flown to the Magic City in a rush, dealt with numerous chaotic matters upon arrival, and hadn't rested since. Only now did he realize how cold his hands had become, and he smiled sheepishly at her. Seeing his slightly awkward expression, Frieren let out a soft sigh, her irritation dissipating. I should just close my eyes for a while. Where is this? Actually, you've been unconscious for 3 days. We're already in the Magic City, Ash replied. 3 days? You must be joking, right? Do I look like I'm joking? But... I thought I just... never mind. As long as you didn't mess around during that time. Faced with his serious expression, Frieren felt a wave of confusion wash over her. Unable to muster the energy to think too deeply, she sighed again, closed her eyes, and decided not to press further. She didn't even notice that, apart from her portable bedding, the inn's blankets felt unusually cold, almost as if they'd only just been laid out. Ash hesitated for a moment before bringing the medicine he had prepared to her bedside. Don't worry, I didn't do anything rash. Anyway, how about drinking some medicine first? Thank you, Frieren murmured. Taking a deep breath, she tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. With Ash's assistance, she managed to prop herself up halfway, leaning against the edge of the bed. It was only then that she noticed how cold Ash's entire body seemed. Puzzled, she frowned. Did you go out for hours just to chill yourself to the bone? No, it's not like that. Why do you always think I'm up to something? Because you always grab my hand on purpose to freeze me. This time is different, Ash said, shaking his head. Himmel mentioned that holding hands helps in situations like this. He did the same thing for Hader when he was sick last time. He chuckled at the memory. Although Hader wasn't exactly thrilled, it worked pretty well. At least, he wasn't as dramatic as you are. That's because your hands are so cold. How on earth can they get that cold? Well, rather than discussing my hands, how about you drink the medicine first? Frieren reluctantly took the potion, sipping it slowly. She grimaced at the bitter taste and shot Ash a suspicious look. After this, you'd better explain everything to me, she said softly. Explain what? I feel like you're hiding something from me, she murmured, her hazy gaze sharpening slightly as she observed him. All right. Drink the medicine first. Come on, be good. Ash blew on the potion before handing it back to her, prompting Frieren to glare at him with a mix of irritation and disbelief. Are you treating me like a child? It's a little hot, so. I've never seen you act so gentle before, Frieren muttered. Years of friendship had given her plenty of reason to suspect this guy had done something questionable behind her back. Ash shrugged, his tone surprisingly candid. I'm just worried you'll be angry later. What? Let's talk about it after you get better, he said vaguely, avoiding her gaze. He had no intention of telling her about the petrification not yet. Meeting her suspicious stare, he simply held out the potion again, urging her to drink. After a while, Frieren finished the entire bowl of medicine, took a sip of water, and then lay down again, exhaustion pulling her deeper into the bed. Ash, his hands warmed from holding the medicine bowl, slipped them under the quilt and grabbed Frieren's hand once more. The dazed elf girl cast him a suspicious glance, her voice weak but her annoyance clear. What are you trying to do, again? I just want to reassure you. People tend to feel uneasy when they're sick, Ash replied with an almost innocent smile. With you holding my hand, I feel even more uneasy, Frieren murmured, her breath shallow as she stared at him, her lips pursed in weak protest. Don't say that. We've been together for so many years. Even if you don't trust others, you have to trust me, right? Then tell me what you did. Quickly. I promise I won't get angry. Oh, don't overthink it while you're sick. I'll definitely tell you everything once you recover. Ash held her hand gently, noting how even now, her skin retained its softness. With his free hand, he reached over to brush her silver hair, slightly disheveled from sleep, a soft smile playing on his lips. Frieren turned her head away in resistance, too weak to pull her hand back or dodge his touch. She could only let out a feeble complaint. I've told you so many times, don't treat me like a child, and don't touch my head. I heard that for many children, being gently patted on the head by an adult can bring a sense of security and love, Ash began, his tone light and playful. This kind of physical contact can convey warmth, support, and protection, making children feel valued and cared for. Frieren stared at him, her protest momentarily drowned out by his unexpected explanation. Especially when children feel uneasy or anxious, or when they need comfort, this kind of closeness can make them feel safe and at ease, Ash continued, clearly enjoying himself. Personally, I think head pats are even more effective than hand-holding. But since Himmel suggested hand-holding as a tradition, I'm trying to respect that. With this two-pronged approach, do you feel twice as safe and comforted? Even if you're a little shy, I'm sure deep down you appreciate it. Frieren was left speechless, both exasperated and amused by his rambling pseudo-lecture. Her fatigue made it hard to muster the energy to argue, and despite herself, she felt an odd sense of relief. Why does this feel comforting? It's so annoying to be treated like a child, but maybe I'll let it slide for now. I'll deal with him later when I'm better. With that thought, Frieren closed her eyes, her breath steadying. Though a mix of embarrassment and comfort lingered, she decided against pushing him away for the time being. However, for the sake of her pride, she silently vowed to retaliate once she recovered. The next day arrived in a blink. After sleeping through the entire night and most of the day, Frieren's fever and cold symptoms had almost completely subsided. Yet, she found herself struggling to recall the events of the previous day. Questions buzzed in her mind, leaving her suspicious, but she had little energy to dwell on them. According to Ash, Himmel and the others had grown impatient and ventured into a nearby labyrinth shortly after arriving in the Magic City. They'd temporarily lost contact, and she hadn't seen them since. Even when they returned a few days later, their expressions were strange, guarded, hesitant, and oddly reluctant to discuss what had transpired during her illness. Frieren couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened, but no matter how much she pressed them, they refused to share the truth. It wasn't until 80 years later, when a similar incident occurred, that Frieren finally pieced together the events of that strange, feverish time. Chapter 109, the belated truth and understanding. Time rewinds to the present. Even after so many years, Frieren still couldn't understand why the entire team had kept the truth from her. That was until she saw Ash reach out and pick up Fern. "Lord Ash, what are you doing?" Fern opened her eyes weakly, her rosy cheeks growing even redder. She seemed to want to say more, but Ash interrupted her with a soothing voice. "It's okay, Fern. Just close your eyes and rest. You'll feel better soon." Frieren, watching from the side, rubbed her chin thoughtfully. Why does this conversation feel so familiar? She racked her brain, trying to recall a memory buried deep in the past. Fern, still confused but trusting Ash, closed her eyes defenselessly, just as Frieren had done so many years ago. And then, under the astonished gaze of everyone present, the sick and frail Fern, along with the blanket wrapped around her, was petrified, turning into a stone statue in Ash's hands. Wait a minute." Frieren's expression turned exaggerated, her hands flying to her aching head. She tried to steady herself, forcing a strained smile as she asked, "Ash, although I think it's unlikely, back then, you didn't treat me like this, did you?" "Well, if you think about it positively, sometimes things that seem impossible actually happen. Isn't that a kind of surprise?" Ash awkwardly avoided her gaze, but it was clear that Frieren wasn't happy at all. Instead, she looked utterly stunned. Her mind raced furiously, piecing together fragments of the past, but the realization hit her so hard that her brain seemed to freeze. She stared blankly at the petrified Fern in his arms, unable to form words. After a long silence, Frieren finally narrowed her eyes at Ash and murmured, "I won't ask anything else right now. Just tell me this: back then, there wasn't any flying magic. How did you transport me to the magic city?" Like this." Ash hesitated before demonstrating. Using magic, he made the stone statue float in midair, pushing it gently with one hand. However, the statue began to drift away, forcing him to chase after it awkwardly before catching it again. The sight of him fumbling with the floating statue sparked a vivid image in Frieren's mind. It was as if she were reliving a memory she hadn't even realized she had. At last, everything clicked. Now she understood why the others had such strange expressions when she asked about what had happened during her illness. She also realized why Ash had seemed so guilty at the time, going out of his way to be unusually gentle, yet refusing to explain himself. Her lips pursed as she asked, You didn't, by any chance, carry me around like this when I was petrified, did you? Did you pretend nothing was wrong, only lifting the seal at the end to make me think I'd just been drowsy and somehow arrived at the magic city? Well, compared to such trivial details, isn't it more important that your pain was relieved and your illness cured immediately? There's nothing wrong with that. But still. Frieren trailed off, her tone caught between exasperation and disbelief. Even she couldn't figure out how to properly reprimand him for such an absurd yet undeniably effective method. After all, it had worked, but it was hard to ignore how inconsiderate it felt to be treated like cargo. It was like cramming someone into the trunk of a car because there wasn't enough space inside. While they might arrive at their destination without issue, the experience of being treated like baggage was difficult to put into words. Although the treatment of being petrified might be better than being thrown into a trunk, at least there were no bumps along the way. In terms of experience, though, it still felt a bit like being knocked unconscious and stuffed into the back of a car. After so many years, Frieren had come to realize that saying such things to Ash was practically useless. After all, Ash cared far more about effective results than he did about the feelings of others. No matter how much she complained or argued, he hadn't changed. Frieren sighed, lowering her eyes with a mix of anger and resignation. You need to reflect on your actions and apologize to Fern, and to me. Why? Because not every problem needs to be solved so crudely. The process matters too. I understand what you're saying, but... What? Are you planning to justify yourself again? Frieren crossed her arms, her expression sour. Ash hesitated, then asked, if you had to choose, would you prefer being petrified and wheeled to the magic city, or being sick for days, suffering while searching for medicine? Which one is better? That's not the point. I don't like being sick, but I also don't like being suddenly petrified and transported like cargo. Is that so? Understood. Not really. I just find your stance on this a little peculiar. Frieren shot him a sharp glare. Over the years, she had grown more confident in expressing herself, even against Ash. Still, Ash couldn't help but muse silently, she's always had these odd convictions about certain things. Is it just because she's an elf, or is it because, at her core, she's still just a girl? He remembered how, long ago, she hadn't even cared when her underwear was accidentally seen. It wasn't until he pointed it out that she started being more mindful. Ash shook his head, sighing in exasperation. Why are you looking at me and sighing? Isn't that a bit rude? Frieren demanded, clearly annoyed. Don't get me wrong. I'm just feeling a little conflicted. Sometimes, I can't even understand someone like you. Hey! That's even ruder. Frieren snapped, glaring at him. As the two bickered, Yubel watched with great amusement. She nodded to herself, a grin spreading across her face. These two are more entertaining than most people, she mused aloud, clearly enjoying the show. Ash ignored Yubel for the moment and turned his attention back to the petrified fern in his arms. He stared at the statue in silence for a while before finally speaking. I'll reflect on what you said later, but, since she's already been petrified, shouldn't we just get her to the magic city first? What do you mean by that? Frieren asked, her tone sharp. You're acting like the crime's already been committed, so we might as well go through with it. Then should I cancel it? No. You've already sealed her, and it wasn't me who did it. Besides, I'm not the one who'll get scolded or criticized later. So, you might as well continue. You really are my best friend, Ash said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Of course, we're best friends. Frieren gave him a playful pat on the shoulder, smiling as if she hadn't just thrown him under the bus. At that moment, Yubel raised her hand, interrupting their exchange. Excuse me, she said, a sly smile on her lips. Can we break up this little love fest for a moment? What's wrong? Frieren asked. How far are we from the magic city? Yubel inquired, her tone casual yet pointed. How far? Ash lowered his head, pondering for a moment. After calculating the speed and magic consumption required for flying, he replied casually, half a day. Half a day? I think it'll take a little over half a day at most if I don't stop. But if I need to take breaks, who knows how long it'll take, Yubel said, spreading her hands helplessly after a quick calculation. Frieren, you carry her, Ash suggested flatly. Are you kidding me? Even I can't fly for long. Flying magic consumes a lot of energy, Frieren retorted, giving him an exasperated look. Fine, I'll do it then, Ash said with a resigned sigh. He already had a sinking feeling that the awkward posture he had once used in a snowstorm was about to make an unwelcome return. Ash glanced at the petrified girl in his arms, noting her tall and imposing figure. Then, he turned his gaze to Yubel, whose curves were more modest but still well proportioned. Nodding unconsciously, he muttered, it shouldn't be too strange. I don't know if what you're saying is weird or not, but don't you think your gaze is a bit rude? Yubel, sensitive to such scrutiny, crossed her arms over her chest and glared at him fiercely. Ash, however, remained nonchalant, entirely dismissive of her girlish indignation. Don't take it too seriously. Now, come on. Are we really doing this? I don't mind leaving you behind, Ash replied, his tone indifferent. Fine. Let's go. Yubel, spurred by his dismissiveness, leaped onto his back without hesitation, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. The unexpected intimacy of the gesture left Frieren blinking in surprise. When did your relationship get so close? I'm confused. Why do you think we're close? Ash muttered, though he wanted to complain further. Let's go already. Yubel urged, sounding far too cheerful for Ash's liking. Exchanging a resigned glance with Frieren, Ash gave up on further protests and silently took to the sky. The sensation of Yubel clinging to his back was distracting. It wasn't like carrying the petrified fern, but it was still enough to make him self-conscious. Why can't I feel anything about this? Ash thought to himself, trying to rally his enthusiasm. But the idea of being genuinely happy about carrying Yubel felt like a defeat he wasn't willing to admit. Admit it, you're actually enjoying this, Yubel teased, her voice close to his ear. How could you not? You're getting close contact with a beautiful girl like me. Do you think that's even possible? Ash shot back, annoyed. Of course it is. After all, didn't you lift my skirt the first time we met? Can you stop bringing that up? I've apologized countless times already. Just, drop it. Seeing no point in arguing further, Ash freed one hand to swat her lightly. However, realizing it might cause unnecessary trouble mid-flight, he decided to hold off for the time being. Yubel, meanwhile, clung to him like an octopus, ensuring she wouldn't fall. The oddity of her posture made the situation even stranger, but Ash pressed on. After 2 brief rests for Frieren, they finally arrived at the Magic City by evening. Now that we're here, I have a question, Yubel said, hopping off his back with ease. She placed a finger on her chin, tilting her head thoughtfully. If she's already petrified, why were we in such a rush to get here today? Her question left both Ash and Frieren momentarily speechless. That's a good question, Frieren admitted, looking at Ash with a mix of confusion and exasperation. Ash scratched his head awkwardly, avoiding their gazes. Well, it's not like we could just leave her out there. Sure, but wasn't the whole point of petrifying her to buy time? Yubel pressed, her tone almost teasing. Her question left both Ash and Frieren momentarily speechless. Because they were all focused on curing the illness as quickly as possible, they had accidentally overlooked the fact that the patient was already petrified. This meant there was no real urgency to worry about time, right? So now, we should find a hotel as soon as possible. I wonder if the one we stayed in last time has closed down, Ash muttered. Feeling that his usual residence in the city had likely become useless after so long, Ash walked ahead, silently carrying the statue. He pretended not to hear the conversation behind him. Frieren, meanwhile, pulled out a book and followed quietly, pretending she hadn't heard anything either. The two of them tacitly feigned ignorance, their synchronized behavior making Yubel smile unconsciously. It felt as though she was seeing a new side of them. With a light-hearted skip, she quickly caught up to them. Ash, moving with practiced ease, soon found an inn. After securing a room, he purchased the necessary medicine, boiled it, and finally placed the statue under the bed. Adjusting the quilt, he carefully covered the statue before silently lifting the seal. Although more than half a day had passed since the petrification began, by the time Ash had finished preparing the medicine, it was nearly dusk. For Fern, however, who had been feverish and dazed, the experience felt like no more than a fleeting moment, closing her eyes and reopening them. Hey? A ceiling. As her eyes fluttered open, the sight of an unfamiliar ceiling made her wonder if she was hallucinating. She blinked blankly, her thoughts too scattered to make sense of anything. Ash adjusted his expression, offering her a gentle smile. Fern, you're finally awake. Master Ash. Fern turned her head toward him, her voice soft and uncertain. What am I doing here? You've been asleep for 3 days. We've arrived at the Magic City, Ash replied smoothly, repeating the explanation he'd prepared earlier. He reached out and gently held her small hand, which was still warm from the fever. It's so cold. Fern instinctively pulled her hand back, her wide, slightly teary eyes looking up at him with confusion and a hint of grievance. For the moment, she forgot to question how she had ended up here. Sorry, Ash apologized, scratching his head. I made the same mistake twice. Twice? What are you talking about? Fern asked, tilting her head in puzzlement. No, it's nothing. Don't worry about it, Ash replied hastily, realizing that saying too much would only complicate matters. He focused instead on helping her sit up. Standing off to the side, Frieren observed the scene quietly. Memories of her own time being sick surfaced unbidden. As her gaze lingered on Ash's cold hands, something clicked in her mind. She finally understood he wasn't taking advantage of Fern while she was vulnerable. He was simply too preoccupied with ensuring her safety to care about appearances or propriety. He had rushed all the way here, carrying the petrified Fern, without stopping to rest properly. He hadn't even thought of himself. And yet, despite his genuine concern, she had always viewed him through a lens of suspicion, assuming the worst of his intentions. The realization hit Frieren like a sudden jolt, leaving her momentarily speechless. A faint blush crept onto her cheeks, though she couldn't tell if it stemmed from shame or some other emotion. Biting her lower lip gently, she lowered her head, allowing her long hair to cascade down an obscure half of her face. Her fingers unconsciously played with her ponytail as her expression grew more complicated and subtle. Even though she often found him rude and overly casual, she couldn't deny that his actions were beyond reproach. Chapter 109.5, finally arrived in the Magic City legal lowly sense. Even though Frieren often found Ash rude and overly casual, she couldn't deny that his actions were beyond reproach. But that was indeed his way of showing care. While his actions might not always seem appropriate or delicate, it would also be unfair to completely dismiss them, wouldn't it? As Frieren thought this through, she realized she wanted to have a proper conversation with him. However, now wasn't the right time. Pushing aside her dissatisfaction and feeling a faint, almost imperceptible sense of shame, she turned her head to look at the wall beside her. In a voice barely audible, she said, Ash. What's wrong? Thanks. What are you talking about all of a sudden? Ash, still holding the medicine in his hand, looked at her with genuine confusion. It had been 80 years since the last time something like this happened, and even he couldn't easily connect the dots. In his mind, Frieren wasn't someone prone to sentimentality or thoughtful gestures though, admittedly, he wasn't entirely sure if that impression was accurate. For Frieren, however, it hadn't been that long. Although she knew Ash didn't understand what she meant, she had no intention of explaining. Instead, she muttered softly, almost to herself, "Don't worry about it. And I'm sorry." Wait, what? You're apologizing and thanking me all of a sudden? Now I'm a little panicked. Did you eat some poisonous mushrooms during your lunch break? Hey! His absurd speculation annoyed Frieren, and she instinctively mimicked Fern's occasional habit of kicking people when upset. She raised her leg and kicked him lightly on the calf. Why are you attacking me all of a sudden? I'll have you know, I'm a firm believer in equality between men and women. Feminism? I get it. But can I kick you later? Ha! Hey! Ash's train of thought was completely derailed, leaving him bewildered. Frieren, not bothering to explain, snatched the medicine from his hands. She turned her attention to Fern, who was equally puzzled, and began feeding her the medicine. I'll handle this. You just do what you did before. It's a bit embarrassing, but it works. What happened before? Frieren's unusually strange behavior left Ash scratching his head in confusion, but he eventually pieced together what she was referring to. Even though he still didn't fully understand, he decided to let it go for now. Instead, he warmed his hands with hot water, then gently held Fern's small hand with one hand while using the other to pat her head softly. Master Ash. I'm not a child anymore, Fern said shyly, her cheeks flushing as she obediently swallowed the bitter medicine. Despite her compliance, her expression carried a hint of resistance. I know, but you still feel uneasy at times like this, don't you? That's true, but... Fern hesitated, ready to assert her independence again. However, Ash spoke first, his voice softer now, as he stroked her hand gently. If the day ever comes when I feel uneasy, I hope you'll hold my hand the same way. Even adults need comfort sometimes. That makes sense, I guess. Then, is it a promise? Hearing this, Fern felt a wave of warmth spread through her heart. Any lingering resistance melted away. Her tense body relaxed, and her expression softened into a weak but genuine smile. With Ash's approval, Frieren carefully brought the potion to Fern's lips. Fern unconsciously closed her eyes, surrendering to the moment and simply enjoying the gentle caress. Even as the high fever continued to assault her body, a comforting warmth blossomed in her heart. It felt as though all her pain and worries had been swept away, leaving only this pure and serene emotion flowing within her. For a fleeting moment, she almost didn't want to recover. Is this a family of three, father, mother, and daughter? Yubel stood nearby, watching Ash and Frieren as they tended to Fern. Her expression was peculiar, her tone carrying more than a hint of amusement. It wasn't entirely a joke, the scene before her truly resembled a happy family of three. Hearing this, the trio exchanged glances, each with their own thoughts. Though they all had complaints about Yubel's untimely remark, they decided to ignore her for now, unwilling to disrupt the atmosphere. After a day of rest and a full night's sleep, Fern awoke the next evening, the sky outside bathed in the warm hues of a gorgeous sunset. Sitting up slowly, she stretched, feeling new vitality coursing through her body. A deep sense of happiness and satisfaction welled up within her. Looking around, she noticed the two most important people in her life sitting quietly nearby, immersed in their books. An indescribable warmth filled her heart. For a moment, she felt an urge to either run away or throw herself into their arms and hold them tightly. Are you feeling better now? Ash's voice broke her reverie as he looked up from his book and walked over to her. He placed a hand on her forehead to check her temperature, then, as if unsure, reached over and pressed his hand against Frieren's forehead. "Why are you checking mine too?" Frieren asked, her tone tinged with mild annoyance, though she didn't resist. "Well, since you're both girls, your body temperatures should be about the same. It's just for comparison, seems fine, right?" "Yes. I've fully recovered." "Thank you, Lady Frieren, Master Ash," Fern said, her voice filled with gratitude. Despite an overwhelming urge to express her emotions more openly, she restrained herself, offering a perfect smile instead. "That's good," Frieren replied with a smile of her own. Ash, meanwhile, gently stroked Fern's head, his tone a mix of affection and concern. "Still, you should rest a bit longer. The assessment for first-class magicians is still some time away. But you can already sign up." "By the way, I've signed up myself," Yubel chimed in from her seat, crossing her legs. "It's better to get it done early." "In that case, you should go sign up first. As for me, I feel like my body will fall apart if I stay in bed any longer," Fern said as she moved her hands, stretching. Midway through, she paused and looked at Ash and Frieren with a hint of worry. "Master Ash, Lady Frieren, you didn't secretly sign up without telling me, did you? Why do you sound like a parent worried about their child going to school alone?" Ash asked, raising an eyebrow. "Of course I'd be worried. And, when I went to the Magic Academy before, Master Ash only escorted me once." As she recalled the memory, Fern felt a mix of embarrassment and frustration. She glanced at Ash and softly complained, "At the time, I was really scared." "Ash," Frieren interjected, her gaze sharp as she stared at him. The accusatory looks from both of them hit Ash like a long overdue boomerang. Clutching his stomach as if nursing a sudden ache, he sighed. "You didn't tell me back then. How was I supposed to know you'd be scared?" All right, I admit it's my fault, but..." "But what? Are you trying to come up with more excuses?" Frieren's voice turned stern, her gaze unwavering. "How could I? I'm not avoiding signing up or anything. It's just, to take the exam, you need to be at least a level 5 magician, and I don't have the qualifications yet. Now that you mention it, I don't have the qualifications either." Ash's statement left Frieren momentarily stunned. She then turned her attention to Fern. "Fern, you'll have to go by yourself. At this point, it's up to you or Yubel. As long as one of you succeeds, we can still head north." "No. Lady Frieren, I can't do it alone. And Yubel might fail too." "You can do it." "No. If I fail, the next opportunity won't come for another 3 years. Then we'll hire a first-class magician. We're not qualified anyway." "No. That means we'll have to go without snacks again. If it comes to that, we can still rely on Lord Ash. Doesn't he know some influential people in this country?" Fern, who was particularly obsessed with desserts, refused to compromise on this matter. She grabbed Frieren, whose face was full of reluctance, and turned to Ash, who looked ready to jump out of the window to escape. With a frown, Fern asked, "Master Ash, what are you doing? Why are you so resistant to taking the assessment?" "I'm not resisting the assessment, I'm just a little..." "Enough. Come here. We're going to the Magic Association together." Before Ash could finish his explanation, Fern strode forward, grabbed his hand, and began pulling him along. With one hand holding Ash and the other gripping Frieren, he dragged them both toward the Magic Association. Yubel, who had been lounging in a chair and observing the chaos with amusement, watched the trio leave with a gloating expression. She sighed inwardly, it feels like the roles have reversed again. These guys, they're getting more and more entertaining. Magic City, core area. The Magic Association branch occupied an expansive piece of land, its entrance marked by a grand staircase that led visitors into a hall reminiscent of an ancient temple. Behind the hall stood a flawless, pure white tower, its spire piercing the sky like a guardian's sword. This striking structure added to the grandeur of the complex and symbolized the endless pursuit of magical knowledge. The gateway to this mystical world resembled the door of an ancient castle, adorned with intricate carvings that showcased exceptional craftsmanship and exuded a commanding presence. Every detail radiated an aura of magnificence and authority, leaving no doubt that this was a place of extraordinary significance. The entire complex was a masterpiece, rivaling even the renowned Holy City group in splendor. It stood as a testament to the brilliance of magical civilization. What a surprise! Is this branch really receiving as much support from the kingdom as the rumors suggest? Fern, who had never visited this branch before, couldn't help but marvel at its grandeur. She began to believe the rumors of its close ties to the upper echelons of the kingdom of Esther. Subconsciously, her gaze shifted to Ash. However, Ash didn't notice Fern's stare. Instead, he looked at the magnificent structure before them, shook his head, and sighed. She spent a fortune on this place, so of course it looks impressive. It's not her money, after all. Why would she bother being frugal? Why do you sound like it's your money being spent? Frieren asked, her curiosity piqued. Let's just get this over with, Ash muttered, realizing he had said too much. He quickened his pace, stepping onto the stairs and leaving the two behind. But before he could get far, he almost collided with a familiar figure at the intersection. The girl before him had extraordinarily long, light blonde hair and emotionless brown-red eyes. Despite her petite stature, she exuded an undeniable presence, one that demanded attention. The overly long hair gave her a soft and endearing appearance, much like a kitten just waking from a dream. There was a hint of laziness in her demeanor, coupled with an undeniable cuteness that made people want to approach her and tease her gently. And that was exactly the case. Since, the lily-like girl dressed in a blue and white outfit, hadn't changed at all since Ash first met her. Even after more than 10 years, time had left no trace on her. When Ash first encountered her, she was already a first-class magician. Now, she should undoubtedly be considered a highly experienced one. Yet, her unchanging appearance and demeanor made Ash wonder if there truly existed magic capable of halting time and preserving eternal youth. When she noticed him, this older girl who always gave off an impression of silence and innocence actually widened her eyes in surprise. Rarely, she allowed a faint smile to grace her lips, something others almost never witnessed. Master Ash, long time no see. I'm glad to see you. Me too, Sense. How have you been lately? Ash couldn't help but smile at her knowingly, reaching out to ruffle her slightly messy hair. Thanks to you, I've been doing fine lately. Sense narrowed her eyes slightly, appearing somewhat uncomfortable but, surprisingly, didn't avoid his touch. Instead, her face showed only a faint trace of confusion. This interaction left the passing magicians stunned. After all, they had never seen this first-class magician known for being expressionless, taciturn, and aloof, allowing anyone to pat her head. And the one doing it was an unfamiliar man. Since Ash frequently returned to the capital, the Demon King's castle, or even this branch without notifying Frieren or the others, he would occasionally encounter Sense. Given their long acquaintance, Ash had come to view her as a slightly silent but undeniably adorable junior. After all, considering that all first-class magicians were Saria's apprentices, Sense was indeed his junior and from a much younger generation at that. Sense herself seemed to accept this dynamic. After all, Ash wasn't just her senior, he had also saved her during a reckless moment of Saria's and had taken good care of her since then. For these reasons, Sense didn't resist his casual, almost familial behavior. She would even humbly ask for his guidance on magic whenever she had the opportunity. Now, as Ash ruffled her hair, Sense pulled out a book from somewhere, looking up at him with her calm, brown-red eyes. I couldn't quite understand the formula you proposed last time. If you have time, could you please teach me? Or, are you planning to leave again, like last time? No, I definitely have time this time. I plan to stay here longer, Ash replied with a reassuring smile. Really? That's great. Sense nodded slightly, her calm expression betraying little emotion. The conversation ended there. For someone else, the abrupt pause might have felt awkward, but Ash was accustomed to her demeanor. By now, he understood that Sense wasn't particularly skilled at holding conversations and often struggled to figure out what to say next. Chapter 110, Sense, humans do have their limits. The dark side of the Magic Association. Normally, when the conversation reached this point and Sense had fallen silent, Ash would have quickly agreed on a time to meet next time, sparing her any further discomfort and neatly ending the topic. However, this time was different. He needed to exploit internal channels to cheat his way into obtaining a first-class magician's credentials. After some hesitation, he finally decided to speak. Sense, he called her name tentatively. What's wrong? Sense asked, her calm demeanor unshaken. That is to say, ahem. Ash struggled to find the right words, his hesitation only deepening Sense's confusion. Are you feeling unwell? Should I go and call the priest over? No, no. Seeing that Sense's legs were slightly off the ground, ready to take flight, Ash quickly reached out, placing a hand on her head and gently pushing her back down. Although most of the people he knew had eccentric personalities and unconventional ways of thinking that often left him exasperated, he decided not to let it bother him now. Instead, he half knelt down to bring himself to eye level with Sense and asked in a low voice. I need the credentials of a first-class magician. Can you issue me a certificate directly? A certificate for a first-class magician? Yes. Why do you need it? Sense blinked her lazy eyes, tilting her head slightly in confusion. Her reaction was entirely natural. Ash's request was, after all, rather strange. There are various reasons. Are you in charge of issuing them this year? Ash asked, his voice betraying a hint of urgency. Yes, but you also know the final decision is made by Lady Saria. I can't. Sense's desire to help him was evident, but her lack of confidence in dealing with Saria was equally apparent. Their personalities clashed significantly, making any interaction between them a challenge. Ash's unusual request only added to her confusion. In Sense's mind, it should have been very easy for Ash to gain official permission. However, the reality was more complicated. While Ash occasionally handled matters at the branch when he showed up, he had never officially taken on the role of branch director. He avoided responsibilities like the plague, determined not to entangle himself in the Magic Association's affairs. To him, there was no benefit, only endless trouble. The title of first-class magician carried additional implications. It marked one as one of Saria's disciples and granted access to certain privileges, including Saria's personal ultimate rewards. But Saria, knowing Ash all too well, understood that he would exploit such a position to claim the magic he desired. As a result, restrictions were placed on him. Even when he participated in assessments, he was only allowed to act as an examiner occasionally, with the final decisions always resting with Saria. After a moment of reflection, Ash sighed and said, if that's too difficult, just give me any kind of document. This is a bit. Sense hesitated, her calm demeanor faltering slightly. After all these years of friendship, you won't even grant me this one favor? Ash pressed, his tone carrying a hint of reproach. It's not that. It's just that Lady Saria came all the way from the Holy City this time. Sense's face remained expressionless, but her reluctance was clear. Anything involving Saria was something she wanted no part of. Saria? That lazy woman only cares about first-class magicians. What a hassle! Ash muttered, though he wasn't particularly surprised. He knew that obtaining a special anti-counterfeiting seal from Saria under the current circumstances was unrealistic. Normally, Saria wouldn't care if the certificate was handed over directly. However, if Ash truly wanted it, Saria would deliberately withhold it, if only to amuse herself. With most people, a little coaxing or persuasion might suffice. But Saria's intuition was unervingly sharp, practically prophetic. Trying to deceive her was like attempting to outwit someone who already knew your every move. It was an uphill battle, and Ash knew it all too well. Ash sighed, realizing he had no choice but to turn back to the girl in front of him, who was already showing signs of retreat. Sense, think of a way, he urged. Even if you say that. I will. Sense stammered, clearly distressed. It would definitely be easier for you to handle this than for me. Besides, I've always taken care of you. Now that you've grown up a little, are you going to abandon an old man like me? Ash teased, though his tone carried a hint of desperation. Sense's face twisted in discomfort as Ash shook her shoulders, leaving the petite girl dizzy. Despite her disorientation, she stubbornly refused to agree. That's not the case, Master Ash, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Everything else is fine, but this is really beyond my ability. It's impossible for me to do. Have you forgotten what you said to me during your test? Ash countered, his expression turning dramatic as he gestured wildly, even going so far as to beat his chest and stomp his feet. Has the comfortable life dulled your ambitions to the point where you've forgotten your past determination and abandoned everything? Ash's impassioned speech seemed to ignite the atmosphere, but Sense looked as though she'd swallowed a fly. She replied reluctantly in a low voice, of course I remember. At that time, when you attacked me with bad intentions, I said, to make the impossible possible, only a first-class magician can do it. So, I will definitely make the impossible possible. See? You still remember it, don't you? Then. But now I understand that even a first-class magician has limits, Sense interrupted, her tone steady but resolute. Why? Are you giving up without even trying? Because, getting something from Lady Saria without her consent is beyond human capability. I may be a first-class magician, but I am still human, Sense replied, her voice tinged with resignation. Don't say such discouraging things, Sense. Show me your courage as a human again. Believe in me, who believes in you. Ash tried to rally her, his voice filled with determination. But despite his spirited encouragement, Sense remained resistant. Before Ash could launch into another round of persuasion, a sharp female voice interrupted them from behind. Master Ash! What are you doing? Fern, who had been climbing the stairs alongside Frieren, saw Ash shaking Sense by the shoulders as if forcing her to do something. Alarmed, she quickened her pace and shouted as she approached. Before Ash could turn around, Fern reached his side and grabbed his hand mid-motion, glaring at him angrily. I was wondering why you ran off so suddenly. I didn't expect you'd be bullying a child here. She accused. No, this isn't bullying. Ash waved his hands defensively, but Sense, who had just breathed a sigh of relief, tilted her head in confusion. A child? Are you talking about me? She muttered quietly. Then what are you doing? Fern demanded, her gaze sharp as if conducting an interrogation. I'm asking Sense for help, Ash replied truthfully. Sense, however, didn't hesitate to emphasize her stance. No matter what you say, this is something I can't do. Please don't put me in such a difficult position. Don't say that. Giving up before trying isn't your style. I just hope you can. Before Ash could finish, Frieren, who had been quietly observing, interjected. Forcing someone to do something they can't is bullying. By the way, I didn't expect you to have acquaintances in the Magic City. Let's not argue about whether it's bullying or not, Ash said, deflecting the accusation. Besides, if we're talking about acquaintances, you've got some too. Me? This kid? No. I don't know her at all, Frieren replied, furrowing her brows. Her gaze shifted to Sense, scrutinizing her closely. She could sense the girl's strength, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't recall ever meeting her. Ash quickly realized the issue. Frieren wasn't aware that Saria was present. However, explaining the situation seemed troublesome, so he decided to let her discover it on her own. Sense, meanwhile, remained steadfast in her refusal. After repeated attempts to persuade her, Ash finally gave up on taking shortcuts. With a resigned sigh, he turned and began walking toward the counter in silence. Before he had taken more than 2 steps, Fern placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression unreadable. Wait a minute, Master Ash. You haven't apologized to this child yet. Yes, yes. I'm sorry, Sense, Ash said helplessly, glancing back at the petite magician. I'll treat you to a meal later when I have time. Sense shook her head slightly, her expression softening. Don't worry about it. If anything, I'm the one who should apologize for not being able to help. What a good child, Frieren remarked, her tone carrying a hint of reproach. Unlike someone else. Ash pretended not to hear her comment and continued toward the counter. However, as he had anticipated, the teller was a young clerk he didn't recognize. Unfamiliar with Ash and unwilling to bend the rules, the clerk handled the situation impartially. I'm sorry, but you don't meet the qualifications, she said, her tone polite but firm. Is there really no way? Fern interjected, clearly frustrated. Can't we make some sort of compromise? What if these two demonstrate their abilities? They're both incredibly skilled easily on par with first-class magicians. The teller, much like Sense before her, looked helpless. I'm sorry, but that's not something I have the authority to approve. Before the clerk could finish, Sense, who had not yet left, stepped forward. Let them participate, she said calmly. Master Sense. The clerk's eyes widened in surprise. Isn't my word enough? Sense asked, her tone composed yet commanding. Of course. If you say so, we can absolutely make special arrangements. The nervous clerk quickly agreed, fumbling to register their information. With no one else around to contest the decision, it wasn't difficult for Sense to use her influence. However, the situation left Fern visibly stunned. This world is so corrupt, Ash suddenly declared, his voice dripping with mock disdain. The magic association relies on connections. One day, I'll tear apart this hypocritical, shady system. Fern stared at him, bewildered by his sudden outburst. Meanwhile, Sense looked equally confused, her expression caught between shock and disbelief. If there really was a conspiracy, Sense thought, Ash would be the prime culprit. For him to say such things now, was he planning to tear himself apart? Even Frieren was taken aback. Aren't you the one using connections right now? And you're criticizing yourself. No, you misunderstand, Ash replied, feigning seriousness. I don't want to do this, but I have to set a good example for Fern. What if she starts thinking about shortcuts all the time? His words carried a certain conviction, but the timing made it difficult to take him seriously. Let's consider this a special circumstance. I may be using the back door temporarily, but I swear I'll expose this shady system someday. Master Ash, Fern said, her voice tinged with exasperation, you're standing in the headquarters of the Magic Association. Aren't you worried about offending someone by saying that? Offend them? Good. Ash retorted, his tone theatrical. In a normal story, behavior like yours would guarantee a character's untimely demise, Fern muttered, looking genuinely concerned. Please don't make such reckless statements again. As she spoke, she turned around to thank and apologize to Sense, only to find the girl had disappeared after bowing politely to Ash. That kid, wouldn't they have already asked someone to assassinate Lord Ash? Fern murmured, a hint of worry in her voice. She couldn't help but recall a story she had read not long ago, where similar events led to an untimely demise. Frieren shook her head gently. No, that child didn't seem angry. To be honest, I don't fully understand it, but there was no hostility. Not angry? Fern asked, puzzled. No, Frieren confirmed with certainty, which brought Fern some relief. She then turned to Ash with a stern expression. Master Ash. You must never say such things again. Do you understand? Ash sighed dramatically. It really saddens me that the child has grown up enough to understand such things. I'm not a little kid. Fern retorted. By the way, Master Ash, the next time we meet that person, you'll be very polite. You'll thank them properly and then apologize. Sure, Ash muttered, unsure of how to respond. And you can't bully others, absolutely not. You have to be polite. After all, that child must be the daughter or granddaughter of some big shot in the Magic Association, right? For the last time, I wasn't bullying anyone, Ash said, exasperated. The situation had clearly been misunderstood by both sides, leaving Ash distressed. Nonetheless, he nodded silently and turned back to the clerk, who was still watching him with a mix of uncertainty and unease. With a resigned sigh, he wrote his name on the registration document, feeling more frustrated about having to take the exam than anything else. After leaving the Magic Association, the group began to part ways. Fern, upon learning that the house she used to live in hadn't been sold by Ash, decided to move back to her hometown. Not only did she feel nostalgic, but she also believed it would save on accommodation costs. Before returning, however, Fern planned to buy cleaning supplies. Years of neglect would have left the house in disrepair. Frieren, reluctantly dragged along, was tasked with helping clean up, and Fern intended to bring Yubel later for extra assistance. Ash, wanting to avoid revealing that he had occasionally returned to the house in secret, found an excuse to separate from the group and quietly head home first. When Ash arrived at his house, he was surprised to find an unexpected guest waiting for him. Sense, who had left the Magic Association earlier, was standing in front of his door. She looked serene, like a lazy kitten basking in the sun, her gaze fixed on the clouds above. The stillness of the scene was almost surreal, so much so that even a bird perched atop her head didn't disturb her. Ash frowned in confusion at the sight. Quietly approaching, he accidentally startled the bird, which flew away in a flutter of wings. Leaning forward slightly and resting his hands on his knees, he asked, Sense, what are you doing here? What am I doing? Sense blinked slowly, her long lashes fluttering like a butterfly's wings. No. Why do you seem like you have no idea what I'm talking about? You said you'd treat me to a meal later, didn't you? Sense tilted her head slightly, her expression as innocent as a curious bird. Did I remember it wrong? I did say that, Ash admitted, rubbing his temple with a sigh. But, never mind. Let me ask you this, has anyone ever invited you to a meal before? Yes, Sense replied promptly. Have you ever gone? No. I see. Ash muttered to himself, his thoughts swirling. Are geniuses like her just missing something fundamental? Or is it that their focus on one area leaves them lacking in others? As the youngest and most powerful first-class magician in history, Sense's magical talent was undeniable. But when it came to interpersonal relationships, she seemed too straightforward, almost naive. Although this shouldn't be considered a disadvantage after all, being powerful enough as a magician is the greatest advantage, there were still moments where her peculiarities stood out. Don't you have any money? Sense asked, noticing Ash seemed troubled by something. Without hesitation, she silently handed over her purse. I have some with me. You can use mine. If I use your money, it's not really my treat, is it? Ash replied, raising an eyebrow. I don't mind, Sense said simply. There was no trace of pretense or insincerity in her tone. It was clear she genuinely didn't care about material possessions. This attitude made sense considering her background. Before becoming a first-level magician, Sense had come from a very wealthy family. She had never placed much value on money, as it was something she'd always had in abundance. Ash suddenly realized something about her. She wasn't just a prodigious magician, she was the epitome of a life winner, a textbook example of someone who was wealthy, powerful, and privileged. Well, perhaps beautiful wasn't the right word. In her case, she was more of a rich and powerful lowly. While she might not be the first choice for those who preferred a more mature companion, she was undoubtedly the ideal person to rely on if one wanted to avoid working hard. Chapter 111, The Short-Sighted Sense, Fern's old friend. Sense didn't quite understand what Ash was thinking, so she took out a book and gently pushed it toward him. Master Ash, if possible, while we're eating, could you explain the basic formula of the spell we mentioned earlier? Is this your real purpose? Not entirely. I am somewhat looking forward to having dinner with Master Ash. Although she said that, her expression didn't show even a hint of anticipation. Instead, she appeared completely serious. Ash studied the stoic girl carefully for a while, his gaze making Sense visibly uncomfortable. Finally, he gave up and muttered, From your expression, I can't tell you're looking forward to it at all. Sense's eyes widened slightly at his blunt remark. She lowered her head, looking troubled for a moment, before softly apologizing, her tone tinged with helplessness. I feel a little sorry. No, there's no need to apologize. I'm not angry or anything. Is that so? Anyway, let's put this topic aside for now. With a sigh, Ash turned toward the gate of the yard, which had clearly been unused for years. I need to sort out the situation inside first. Cleaning? Can I help? No, just wait outside for a bit. Sense nodded slightly, though confusion flickered across her face. She watched as Ash opened the door to the house. The moment he did, a gust of wind blew through, scattering dust and debris everywhere. The interior looked like it had been ransacked, with furniture overturned and objects strewn about. Ash seemed satisfied with the chaotic scene he had created under Sense's bewildered gaze. There was no helping it. Although the house hadn't been used for several years, it wasn't in the state one might expect after decades of neglect. To avoid suspicion, Ash had decided to mess it up completely, ensuring no one could discern its original condition. On the way to find a restaurant, the two walked in silence, one following the other. Sense was naturally quiet, but Ash didn't mind. He was used to this type of person and didn't find the lack of conversation uncomfortable. Despite the silence, the atmosphere between them was peaceful. However, halfway through their walk, Sense seemed to recall something and suddenly spoke. Speaking of which, Master Ash, who were the child and the elf from earlier? Fern and Frieren. Ash paused for a moment, then asked, Do you remember a long time ago when I asked if you wanted to raise a child? Yes, but you never actually asked me. When Lady Saria acted recklessly, you protected me. You only mentioned that you had small animals at home and hadn't fed them yet. Well, you were still young at the time. How could I ask something like that? As I recall, you're not married, correct? They're my friend's children. You've been raising them for years. They've grown up without me realizing it. Time flies so fast. Back then, you were only this tall, well, you're still this tall now. Ash gestured at chest height but unconsciously lowered his hand to the top of Sen's head. The realization that she hadn't grown at all made him laugh. Without thinking, he ruffled her hair. You haven't grown in all these years. When I became a first-class magician, I was already an adult. Normally, I wouldn't have grown much after that, Sense replied, her tone slightly gloomy at his strange sigh. I remember the legal age of adulthood in the kingdom used to be 13. No, wait, it was changed to 15 about half a century ago. So, how old are you now? That's a secret. Oh, you actually have such a girlish side. What a surprise, Ash teased, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Sense turned her face away in mild resistance, which surprised Ash. Her reaction was rare, and it amused him. Taking advantage of this unusual display of emotion, he rubbed her head and pinched her cheeks, playfully teasing her. Please don't do this. I'm troubled. Sense murmured. It's okay. I'll treat you to something delicious later. Ash replied cheerfully. Even if you do this, I will still. The playful lines Ash used to coax Sense didn't sound like something a gentleman would say. Sense couldn't help but feel a mix of amusement and confusion, unsure of how to respond to him. However, to an outsider, the scene could easily be misunderstood as a teenager bullying an unwilling little girl. Sure enough, a girl dressed in eye-catching clothes rushed into the scene like a gust of wind. She had short, neat orange hair tied into cute twin ponytails. Her outfit was bold, a white crop top paired with emerald green hot pants and a white belt, complemented by over-the-knee white boots. Her appearance exuded a sense of energy and heroism with every step. Her pretty face was framed by sharp, determined eyes that radiated an unyielding sense of justice. You! What are you doing? The girl demanded, her clear and powerful voice tinged with anger and disbelief. Bullying a child in broad daylight? Come with me to the security team immediately. Without hesitation, she grabbed Ash's hand, the one that had been teasing Sense, ready to drag him away on the spot. The unexpected situation left Sense momentarily stunned, while Ash looked completely innocent. Wait a minute. If you're going to arrest me, at least hear my explanation first. Ash protested. You can explain yourself to the security team. The girl snapped. You're making it sound like I really did something wrong, Ash muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. Caught off guard by the sudden turn of events, Ash turned to Sense, who was still in a daze. Don't just stand there, help me explain. Is it normal to have the victim explain? Sense muttered under her breath but sighed and stepped forward. I believe your name is Kin, a third-class magician, correct? Let him go. Kin turned to look at Sense, her gaze scrutinizing her from head to toe. After a moment of stunned silence, Kin's expression grew increasingly exaggerated as realization dawned on her. You. Could it be, the first-class magician Sense? Since you recognize me, that simplifies things, Sense replied calmly. Those long, unmistakable features. And, cough. Kin trailed off, trying to suppress her shock. She glanced at Sense's petite frame and couldn't help but blurt out, why would someone as important as you be bullied by a street thug? Master Ash is not an ordinary street thug, Sense replied with a straight face. Hey, not just an ordinary street thug. Kin repeated, baffled. The strange explanation left Kin stunned, and even Ash doubted his ears. Feeling a twinge of exasperation, Ash turned to Sense and pinched her cheek lightly. I'm begging you. Can't you explain it properly? You're just making things more confusing. I'm sorry. What I meant to say is... Lord Ash is... Sense faltered, looking genuinely distressed. She pondered for a long moment, then looked at Ash seriously. How should I put this? Don't ask me. Ash groaned. So, is he actually a nice person? Sense finally said, her answer subtle yet ambiguous. Ash sighed in defeat and let go of her cheek. Sense, relieved, quietly took a step back, as if distancing herself from the chaos she had unintentionally escalated. After confirming she was at a safe distance, she looked at Kin again with an expressionless face, thought about it for a moment, and suddenly asked knowingly. Why do you know me but not Master Ash? Hey? Isn't it because you go to the Magic Association every day? I've seen you there occasionally before, Kin replied, tilting her head. Honestly, I'm more surprised that you know someone as unimportant as me. Because I remember the names and appearances of all the branch magicians, Sense replied calmly, then turned to look at Ash with a serious expression. Speaking of which, Master Ash, you really should visit more often. Otherwise, not to mention the lower-class magicians, even the newly promoted first-class magicians will start treating your existence as nothing more than a legend. Didn't I visit 2 years ago? Ash retorted, slightly defensive. If you showed up more regularly, at least the front desk staff would recognize you, and they wouldn't have to go through so much trouble, Sense said matter-of-factly. I have various things to handle, too, Ash muttered. He could tell that Sense hoped he would visit more often, but it wasn't that simple. Over the past decade, he had not only been practicing magic and martial arts but also managing various responsibilities. Recently, he had even taken on the task of looking after children. He hadn't had time to act as an examiner in years. As a result, apart from occasional visits to his home, whenever he came to the Magic City, he would head straight to Saria's office. He would either occupy Saria's lounge or visit the private library. Rarely did he go to the main audience hall, where most first-level magicians gathered. As for ordinary magicians, except for a very select few, they had no chance of knowing him, especially those who had joined in the past decade. After all, the last time Saria split her duties was during the incident when Sense was nearly killed. With his workload already overwhelming, Ash couldn't afford to spend time interacting with lower-level personnel. He preferred to communicate directly with first-class magicians to relay necessary instructions. After all, no senior executive would personally explain things to everyone. In recent years, his visits to the Magic Association had been minimal, mostly to read books or check on Sense. His primary workplaces were the Demon King's castle and the royal capital. Compared to those, the Magic Association wasn't nearly as important. When Ash showed a distressed expression under Sense's unwavering gaze, Kin couldn't help but observe him curiously. Even first-class magicians referred to him as Lord, so he must be someone important. Moreover, his name felt oddly familiar, as though she had heard it before. She didn't even know why, but she felt like she had seen him somewhere before. After pondering for a long time, she suddenly raised her finger, pointed at Ash, and exclaimed. I remember now. You're that annoying old man. An annoying old man? Ash was stunned by the sudden accusation, while Sense widened her eyes in surprise and said. You're not seriously saying you've been acting like a hooligan, are you? How is that even possible? Every time I visit, I go straight to the Magic Association's core area. There's no way I'd have the chance to act like a hooligan. Ah, but do you want to act like one so badly? Sense teased. It was just an example. Don't twist my words into something weird. Ash growled, visibly frustrated. He placed his hand on Connie's head, giving her a threatening smile. You'd better explain yourself and clear my name. Otherwise, I'll show you just how annoying this old man can be. Don't mess with my hair. You big pervert. Your body is so heavy. Kin tried to raise her hand to push him away, but an abnormal gravity pressed down on her, leaving her unable to move. Her legs trembled under the weight. I'm a gentle uncle, so I won't get angry right away, Ash said with a calm smile, but I'm also a feminist. So, if you don't want to take an unexpected bath in the river, you'd better explain the slander you've just thrown at me in front of my juniors. Ugh. Kin gritted her teeth, clearly reluctant to comply with his threat. After a moment of hesitation, she finally spoke. You were so arrogant back then. You directly told my friend Fern to leave. Fern? Friend? Leave? Ash furrowed his brows, searching his memory. After a moment, his eyes lit up with recognition. Ah, now that you mention it, I do recall something. When Fern was in the Magic Academy, she had 2 good friends. I think they even came to my house once. But, have we met before? You might not know me, but I know you, Kin said, her voice laced with bitterness. Fern showed us your picture. The ancestral picture? Ash asked, raising an eyebrow. And, you were also there when I dropped out of school. I'll never forget it. Kin's expression darkened, her tone filled with resentment. At that time, you looked so nonchalant. Really? But didn't you just recognize me now? Ash asked, tilting his head. This is... Who knew you wouldn't change at all after all these years? Kin stammered, her face briefly showing embarrassment. Ash sighed and withdrew his hand, no longer pressing her. Instead, he patted her head lightly. All right. It happened so many years ago. Let the past stay in the past. I won't bother you about it anymore, and you don't have to dwell on it either. You have no right to tell me that. But... Kin combed her hair with her fingers, glaring at him warily. Fern, is she back? She's back. You can go to my house if you still remember where it is. Of course I do. I'm not like an annoying uncle like you. With that, Kin stuck out her tongue at him, made a mocking face, and quickly fled the scene. It seemed she intended to head straight to his house, leaving Ash feeling slightly uneasy. Chapter 112, I want to become a father closer to sense than he is. 1. Ash didn't really care about being teased by kids, but... Watching the figure of the girl running toward his home, he couldn't help but touch his chin, murmuring with a worried expression, I don't feel like going home for a while. Why? The seemingly random remark made sense. Who had been quietly listening, look at him in confusion. Because she'll definitely tell my children about us being together. Is there anything wrong with that? Sense asked, tilting her head. I left on the pretext of having something important to do, Ash admitted with a sigh. Yet. Sense's eyes widened slightly, her expression showing surprise. Her reaction puzzled Ash, who raised an eyebrow. What are you thinking about? Master Ash probably thinks it's important to have dinner with me, Sense replied without hesitation, her tone matter of fact. She glanced at him as if trying to confirm her guess. Am I wrong again? Well, it's not entirely a misunderstanding, Ash said with a helpless smile. Faced with the concerned gaze of his junior, Ash could only nod and stroke her soft hair. Spending time together was important, sure, but initially, he'd planned to tidy up his house and cover any traces of his brief visit before heading back. However, saying such things out loud felt unnecessarily hurtful, so he kept it to himself. He was mildly anxious about what might happen when he returned home, but for now, he was outside, and a charming girl was by his side. Other concerns could wait. At least, that's how he rationalized it at the moment. But... Master Ash, why do you keep touching my hair? Because your height is just right, Ash replied, stretching out his hand as if to demonstrate. To him, Sense's height made her the perfect handrail for his idle gestures. Sense gave him a strange look, but before she could comment, Ash suddenly asked. Come to think of it, I've mentioned before that girls should be more diligent about taking care of their hair. When was the last time you washed yours, Sense? It's a little long and hard to manage, but I washed it yesterday, Sense replied defensively. Did you really wash it yesterday with hair this long? Ash asked, genuinely surprised. He leaned closer, picking up a strand of her hair and inspecting it. Without thinking, he brought it closer to his nose. Sense's mouth opened slightly in shock, and she instinctively took 2 steps back. What are you doing? Just checking the smell, it's just hair, right? What's the big deal? It's really just hair, but... I feel a little embarrassed. Sense mumbled, her cheeks faintly flushed. It's fine. It smells like flowers, it's not unpleasant at all. Ash said, seemingly unfazed. That's because I added flower petals when I washed it, Sense muttered, looking at him as though trying to reassure herself. Then, with a soft sigh, she added, but this isn't just about the smell. Master Ash, you're even weirder than I am sometimes. No, I understand girls have a sense of shame, but... Ash, who had sharp ears, caught her words and felt compelled to explain. To some extent, I've watched you grow up, haven't I? Meeting occasionally doesn't make you responsible for me, Sense replied, sighing silently in her heart. Besides, you're not my guardian. Then how about this? I'll be closer to you than your father. How does that sound? Ash suddenly interrupted her thoughts, his tone a blend of seriousness and teasing. What do you mean? Sense's voice unconsciously carried a mixture of surprise and confusion. Do you want to establish a deeper relationship with me? Haha, don't think about it that way. I just said it on a whim. I didn't have any specific plans in mind. I figured as much. You always do things like this, unexpectedly, Sense replied softly. Although she had already anticipated his response, hearing him confirm it again made her let out an inaudible sigh. She wouldn't be angry at this point. After all, they had known each other for more than 10 years, and she had grown accustomed to his temperament. Even so, no matter how long they'd known each other, whenever she was around Ash, her usually calm heart was always stirred by his playful words or actions. For someone like Sense, who often gave off a dull and expressionless impression, it was surprising even to herself that she didn't dislike this feeling. As agreed, Ash led Sense into a nearby restaurant to fulfill his promise to treat her. At the dinner table, Ash patiently explained the magic formula he had proposed 2 years ago. Under his guidance, the complex and intricate theories became vivid and easy to understand. However, as he explained, a trace of doubt crept into Ash's mind. Had Sense never tried to delve deeper into this formula over the past 2 years? Surely, she could have asked Saria, who was always nearby, for clarification. Then again, he remembered that Sense and Saria weren't particularly close, so it wasn't surprising that she hadn't sought her out. Though the doubts lingered, Ash quickly brushed them aside and shifted the conversation to lighter topics, sharing updates about his recent experiences. Naturally, the discussion veered toward magic and Saria's current situation. Ash skillfully guided the conversation, subtly probing for ways to sneak into Saria's private library without running into her. Time flew by, and before they realized it, the restaurant's lights were dimming, signaling closing time. Ash settled the bill as promised and then accompanied Sense on her way home. Halfway through their walk, Sense suddenly stopped and turned to Ash, who was looking around. "Master Ash, I've always had a question." "What is it? Why do you insist on walking me home every time after nightfall?" Sense's voice carried a hint of confusion. "Because you're a girl. Walking alone at night is always a little unsafe," Ash replied casually. "I may not be as powerful as you, but I'm still a first-class magician," Sense said, tilting her head slightly like a curious bird. "Besides, close combat is one of my strengths. It's not just about physical danger." "You really have selective common sense," Ash said with a teasing smile. "That's the one thing I don't want to hear from you," Sense muttered, exhaling softly. "I know what you're thinking, but the danger I'm talking about isn't purely physical," Ash explained, his tone light yet sincere. "And besides, the desire to protect someone has nothing to do with whether they're strong or not." "I don't understand." "You'll understand when you grow up." "How old do you think I am now?" Sense pursed her lips slightly, her tone carrying a hint of sensitivity to the phrase grow up. "Definitely younger than me." "While that's true, I'm not," Sense began but stopped herself mid-sentence. She sighed softly, deciding against pursuing the topic further. The two of them strolled through the deserted streets late at night, and before long, Sense's house came into view. "Come to think of it, I wasn't just saying it casually." As Sense approached her house, Ash's sudden remark made her stop in her tracks, a trace of confusion flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked, turning to face him. "I want to be closer to you than your father." Ash spoke with a gentle smile, though his tone carried a subtle seriousness. "Even though it's a sudden thought, if you ever encounter trouble, you can always tell me. After all, I really want to be closer to Sense." "Ah!" This unexpected remark left Sense momentarily stunned. She turned around slowly, her eyes filled with confusion and doubt. "Why? Why so many whys? I just said what I was thinking." "You're such an unpredictable person." Sense looked up at his face with her usual calm, emotionless gaze, though something seemed to stir within her. Finally, the corners of her mouth lifted slightly, and her eyes softened. "But I don't hate it." After saying that, she turned back around, and Ash stood there, watching her as she walked slowly into her courtyard. The guard at the door stepped forward to greet her, and she turned back briefly, nodding slightly to Ash in a wordless farewell before stepping into the courtyard and disappearing behind the door. However, as she walked in, her gaze met her mother's lively eyes from a distance. Her mother's expression, initially cheerful, turned subtly inquisitive when her eyes shifted from Sense to Ash, who was still standing outside. Sense could already predict the kind of conversation that would follow. Ash, noticing the presence of Sense's mother, simply smiled politely and waved before quickly leaving the scene. Chapter 113, I want to become a father closer to Sense than he is. 2. The moment Sense stepped into the hall, she found herself facing exactly what she had anticipated. Her mother, a noble woman who had hurried downstairs in anticipation of her return, was already waiting for her with great excitement. As soon as the topic turned to Ash, her eagerness became impossible to miss. "Sense, you came back with Master Ash today. What did you do?" Why didn't you invite him in for a cup of tea? That's quite rude. Her mother's smile carried an unspoken meaning that made sense sigh internally. She was well aware of how the atmosphere at home had quietly shifted ever since she had inadvertently revealed Ash's relationship with the local lord. In this world of strict social hierarchies, magicians, despite their extraordinary powers, still lacked sufficient status compared to the nobility. But Sensei's case was different. As Ash's junior and someone he openly cared for, her position had become quite special. Even the local earl, upon learning of her connection to Ash, had shown an unusually deferential attitude toward her family. This unusual treatment stemmed entirely from her relationship with Ash, a connection that appeared simple but was, in reality, far more complex. Even Sense, a core member of the Magic Association, had only begun to suspect Ash's true identity when she witnessed the Earl's reverence for him during the Magic Association's reconstruction more than a decade ago. Who exactly is Lord Ash? Could he be a prince? This question had lingered in her mind for years. She had wanted to ask him directly several times, but Ash clearly had no intention of sharing, so she let it be. Her curiosity about Ash's identity didn't interfere with their relationship. She found comfort and reassurance in his presence, and that was enough for her. But her family saw things differently. Her father, a nobleman, had noticed the Lord's peculiar behavior toward Ash during one of his visits. Unable to suppress his curiosity, he had attempted to inquire indirectly, only to be warned against asking further. In situations like this, parents often lean toward arranging a marriage. After all, who wouldn't want to elevate their family's status? Sensei's parents were no exception. Her age had always been a source of concern for them, and as a potential match, Ash was nothing short of perfect. Naturally, they were eager to encourage this relationship. But when you think about it, isn't it obvious? Who would be interested in someone like me? Master Ash probably just sees me as a child. As her mother continued to press her for updates, Sense found herself staring out the floor-to-ceiling window, her expression blank. She felt as small as a child, her presence often causing misunderstandings with Ash. Letting out yet another silent sigh, she reflected on how much she'd sighed today more than she had in the past year combined. Before heading home, Ash stood outside the Sense family's mansion, feeling a pang of envy. Though he had more wealth and properties than most could dream of, the carefree life of the local nobles eating, drinking, and enjoying themselves without a care was something he couldn't help but admire. If I fail, maybe joining Sense wouldn't be such a bad idea, he murmured, looking at the brightly lit mansion. But the thought quickly gave way to a self-deprecating smile. Turning away without hesitation, he dismissed the idea entirely. After all, when his plans fully unfolded, would Sense even still be alive? That question lingered heavily in his mind. The same could be said for many of the people he knew. Perhaps only Frieren and Saria would remain, just as before. However, if I'm remembered as nothing more than a kind and ordinary person, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad ending. After all. The moonlight poured over Ash, illuminating his face and reflecting the complexity in his expression. He tilted his head toward the sky, gazing at the unchanging moon, and whispered his greatest secret, "I am not human." Reflecting on his identity, he couldn't help but regret some of the things he had said to Sense earlier. Though he enjoyed spending time with her and others who reminded him of lively, innocent creatures, he knew the passage of time was vastly different for them. For him, it was a fleeting moment, for Sense, it was an unstoppable countdown. So, was it really okay to continue like this? But since I've already decided to look after Fern in her old age, what's the harm in saying goodbye to one more person? No. It can't be like this, can it? He muttered to himself, offering a solution only to immediately reject it, shaking his head vigorously. In the end, no satisfactory answer came to him. Deciding to leave the problem for another day, he shrugged it off, resigning himself to muddling through as always. When Ash arrived at his familiar doorstep, he hesitated briefly. Since the door lock had been broken by him previously and replaced with a new one, he had no choice but to climb over the wall to get in. The moment he landed in the courtyard, his surroundings surprised him. The once untidy yard, ravaged by wind and littered with yellow mud, sand, and fallen leaves, was now immaculate. The ground was clean, fresh, and entirely transformed. The vegetation, which had previously grown wild and unchecked, was now neatly trimmed and well maintained. Everything looked so pristine that Ash briefly wondered if he had walked into the wrong house. Before he could process the sight, a familiar figure appeared. "Ken, the lively girl who reminded him of a mischievous puppy, emerged from the house carrying a bucket of water. Her face and clothes were streaked with dirt, giving her the appearance of a stray pup that had been rolling around in the mud. When their eyes met, Kin froze for a moment. Then, setting down the bucket she was holding, she marched toward Ash, her face brimming with dissatisfaction and anger. "Look at the state of your house. It's been a complete mess, and you've been fooling around outside until now. You come back only after everything's nearly done? Do you even have the nerve to show up like this?" Ash couldn't help but smirk and tease, "The way you're talking, it's almost like I'm some irresponsible husband." "Huh? What are you even saying?" Can's face flushed as she stamped her foot in frustration. "Who would marry an old man like you? Besides, I hate adults like you the most. Even if Owa." Her angry retort was cut short as she lost control of the water she had been using to clean the walls. In her outburst, the water splashed out of the bucket, drenching her completely. With a startled yelp, she stood there looking like a drenched puppy. Ash's gaze briefly flickered over her unexpectedly well-proportioned figure now revealed through her wet clothes. But instead of averting his eyes or showing embarrassment, he simply spread his hands and said with a wry smile, "I've been meaning to say this since we first met. While it's true I'm an uncle, hearing it so bluntly still stings a little, you know." Chapter 114, Frieren's Shield. The beginning of the exam. Ash's gaze, though openly lingering on Can's drenched form, lacked any inappropriate intent. Instead, he seemed to share his thoughts casually, which somehow made Can feel relieved but also annoyed. "Is this the time to talk about such things?" she snapped, glaring at him. "Which is worse, physical coldness or mental coldness?" Ash replied, his tone teasing. "Who cares about how an old man like you feels?" Can retorted, her cheeks flushed as she crossed her arms over her chest. Her eyes were a mix of shame and indignation, and if not for the vast gap in strength between them, she might have already challenged him outright. Amused by her reaction, Ash chuckled. He wasn't one to argue with children, but her feisty demeanor was too entertaining. With a playful smirk, he flicked her damp belly lightly with his fingers. "You're such a rude kid," he teased. "Luckily, I'm a kind and gentle uncle. Otherwise, you'd be in real trouble right now. You should thank me." "Ah! Fern!" Kin cried out in frustration, her face turning crimson as she squatted on the ground, overcome with a mix of embarrassment and fury. Startled by her outburst, Ash instinctively stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. Wait! Are you an elementary school student? Calling for backup when you're upset?" No. You actually called someone? Where's your magician's pride? Challenge me to a duel or something. I barely even did anything to you, it was just a tiny flick for revenge. If you actually did something, it'd already be too late." Ken shot back indignantly. "I'm not that kind of person. Besides, Ash began, but before he could finish, a familiar purple-haired girl suddenly burst out of the house. "What's going on here?" Fern asked, her gaze shifting between the wet, squatting Ken and the sheepish Ash. Her expression froze as she pieced the scene together, her eyes narrowing coldly at Ash. "Master Ash, do you have anything you'd like to explain? This isn't my fault." Ash protested immediately, scrambling to defend himself. "It's the kid's fault. I didn't throw the water, she did. And she kept calling me an uncle. All I did was flick her belly as a tiny bit of revenge. That's not too much, is it?" Fern's expression didn't soften. "If what you're saying is true, that kind of behavior is generally considered sexual harassment." "Harassment?" Ash exclaimed, looking genuinely affronted. "She called me uncle multiple times. Flicking her stomach is totally self-defense and well within legal boundaries." "But you are an uncle, aren't you?" Fern replied flatly, her tone as cold as her gaze. "Fern! I never thought your 37-degree mouth could say such cruel words," Ash muttered, clutching his chest dramatically as if stabbed. Turning his head, he spotted Frieren lounging on a swing nearby, clearly enjoying the spectacle while idly peeling melon seeds. "Frieren," Ash called out with mock despair. "Can I borrow your chest? I need to cry for a while." "Absolutely not," Frieren replied without missing a beat, her tone detached. "Don't involve me in your mess. Why are you so cold to me?" Ash lamented. "I just don't want to be dragged into this nonsense," she replied, not even looking up from her melon seeds. Changing the subject abruptly, Ash asked, "By the way, what do you think of my house?" Your house? Frieren glanced around briefly. It's smaller than I expected. Honestly, it's so ordinary it doesn't suit you at all. What do you think my house should look like? Ash asked, raising an eyebrow. A weird fortress, she answered nonchalantly, popping another seed into her mouth. Under Ash's deliberate maneuvering, the conversation between him and Frieren quickly veered off course from the original topic. Remaining composed, he casually draped an arm over Frieren's shoulder and began leading her toward the house with a cheerful stride. But just as they were about to pass by Fern, she silently raised a hand to block their way. Her expression was as cold and unyielding as ever. "Master Ash, do you think this is the first day I've known you? Or, do you take me for some kind of fool who can be easily deceived? Is that really not an option?" Ash sighed deeply under her sharp gaze. Resigned, he pulled Frieren in front of him, using her as a human shield. To add insult to injury, he placed his hands firmly on Frieren's shoulders, resting his chin on her head as if she were a sturdy piece of armor. "If you're going to criticize me so much, I might as well drag Frieren into this too," he declared with mock seriousness. "Why are you dragging me into this?" Frieren asked, her tone flat and resigned. She made no attempt to struggle, though her drooping expression betrayed her exasperation. Fern's frown deepened. "Why are you going to such lengths to avoid this?" "Because I don't think I did anything wrong," Ash replied with a shrug. "I've been labeled as an uncle suspect, so someone should apologize to me." "Why are you acting like such a child?" "I'm just standing up to injustice," Ash said, feigning righteousness. "And, by the way, I've made an ally." He raised Frieren's hand triumphantly as if to cement their newfound partnership. Frieren's mouth twitched ever so slightly. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for how to respond to Ash's shameless antics. "And you're acting like I'm the one in the wrong?" Fern snapped, her cheeks puffing up like an angry pufferfish. "I haven't even mentioned how you sneak off to meet with others while we're working." "Enough. I'm done with Master Ash's nonsense." With that, she grabbed Can's arm and stormed off, leaving Ash and Frieren alone in the now silent courtyard. Dash. The sudden quiet was almost disconcerting. After a while, Frieren, who had been used as Ash's shield, let out a soft sigh. She tilted her head back to glare at the culprit behind her. "Why did you drag me into this?" "It's too lonely to face it alone," Ash replied with a faint smile. "I thought you could help me through this difficult time." "Honestly, Ash, this isn't the first time I've thought you're incredibly selfish." "I'll return the favor next time," he promised lightly. "Forget it," Frieren muttered, shaking her head. "Who says we're friends anyway? Maybe it's best not to overthink it." Frieren, though clearly exasperated, was easily swayed by Ash's words. She didn't even seem to notice how she had contradicted herself. The two of them sat side by side on the swing in the courtyard, staring blankly at the sky in silence. After a long while, Frieren seemed to remember something. Without looking at Ash, she casually remarked, "By the way, that kid Kin mentioned something earlier. She said the first-class magician you were meeting with seemed to hold you in high regard. Based on the description, isn't that the person we met at the Magic Association?" "Yeah, that's sense," Ash replied without hesitation. Chapter 115, Relatives and Friends Fall Out? "Yeah, that's sense," Ash replied without hesitation. Frieren turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. "Tell me the truth. Do you have some high status in the Continental Magic Association? Can you just hand out first-class magician certificates like they're candy?" Ash hesitated for a moment before responding, "If I'm being honest, Saria is the founder of the Magic Association. Do you think I have a high status?" "Liar. Saria." Frieren's brows furrowed as she thought of Saria, the same Saria who had once shredded her master's suicide note and mocked her ideals thousands of years ago. "You're joking, right? That Saria? The one who was so vehemently against teaching humans? And now she's out there mentoring them." Frieren's disbelief was palpable, her frown deepening as she tried to reconcile the thought. "If you think I'm lying, you can go and find her yourself," Ash said, shrugging nonchalantly. "Forget it. I believe you," Frieren replied, sighing. Unable to think of a reason for Ash to lie, she weighed the pros and cons and decided against verifying his claim. After all, her relationship with Saria was less than amicable. They hadn't seen each other in over 1,000 years for good reason. But as she mulled it over, a thought struck her. Since it's Saria, wouldn't it make sense for her to help me? Wouldn't it be easier for you to become a first-class magician if she agreed to support you? Frieren ventured. So, how would you know unless you try? Frieren added. Why don't you go and ask her for me? Ash countered. Honestly, the moment you said Saria was the founder, I lost all interest in participating, Frieren admitted, her reluctance plain. She's definitely not going to let me pass. What was it you just told me? How can you know unless you try? Ash teased with a smirk. Well, just pretend I didn't say anything, Frieren muttered, quickly dropping the subject. Their positions, while not entirely the same, were close enough that Frieren resigned herself to the situation, unwilling to argue further. The two continued to sit side by side, gazing at the sky and chatting idly. It wasn't until much later that Kin, now dressed in Fern's clothes, reappeared. She made a face at Ash before storming off, allowing the two to finally head back inside. Though Fern was still angry and refused to speak to him, she quietly helped tidy up Ash's bedding and supplies, ensuring he could rest comfortably. Lying on the bed, Ash couldn't help but feel a bit nostalgic. It reminded him of the days when he used to practice magic tirelessly. The next day, Fern remained silent, her anger lingering. However, Kin returned, this time bringing along another friend of hers. Predictably, the newcomer shared Kin's prejudice against Ash and had no intention of speaking to him. Fern's anger persisted for several days, and she continued to avoid talking to him. Slowly, though, she began to resume their usual interactions, albeit with an awkward air between them. During this time, Ash remained busy, often leaving the magical city for various tasks. Time passed quickly, and soon the first round of the first-class magician selection exam arrived. The venue was abuzz with anticipation. At the top of the stairs behind the podium stood a middle-aged examiner. Ash recognized him vaguely but couldn't recall his name. He had only seen him twice in the 10 years since becoming a first-level magician. The examiner scanned the scattered crowd below before announcing the rules. This exam is a group battle. There are 58 participants in total. Each group will consist of 3 people. If someone is left without a group, that's just bad luck. After all, luck is a part of strength. If you're left alone, you can't blame anyone else. As he finished speaking, the examiner's gaze briefly flickered toward Ash before quickly looking away. It was a subtle glance, but Ash caught it. The groups were assigned via magic bracelets, and the examiner moved swiftly, as if trying to avoid suspicion. Ash glanced down at his silver bracelet. The number engraved on it read 20? Is this some kind of covert operation? A deliberate targeting? Or just my bad luck? For a moment, Ash doubted his life choices. Frieren, noticing his predicament, peeked at the bracelet and gave him a light pat on the shoulder. Ash turned to her, touched. Frieren, are you willing to trade places with me? Nope. Frieren cut him off with a sweet smile. I just wanted to remind you that the exam is supposed to be fair and just. So, even though we're friends, I won't show any mercy. This time, it's all about individual strength. Frieren interrupted his thoughts with an excited smile. To be honest, I wasn't interested at first, but now. I'm actually looking forward to it. You really are my best friend, Ash muttered, his tone laced with sarcasm. No need to say it out loud, Frieren replied with a teasing grin. There was a certain satisfaction in her demeanor, as if the accumulated resentment between them had finally found an outlet. The prospect of seeing others deal with Ash seemed to excite her. This made Ash turn toward Fern, his last hope for some semblance of support. After confirming their respective numbers, Fern spoke in a businesslike manner, I'm looking forward to a fair competition with Master Ash. What exactly are you looking forward to? Ash asked, his voice tinged with wariness. To showing you my growth, Fern declared confidently. I've already seen it. It was rare to see Fern so spirited, and though Ash wanted to sigh at the situation, he couldn't bring himself to say anything discouraging. Still, the realization that his companions had seemingly become rivals, each targeting him in their own way, left him grappling with the fickleness of human nature. It was a sobering thought, though not enough to truly dishearten him. At first, he considered finding an excuse to bow out gracefully. But seeing how invested they all were, he felt it wouldn't be right to simply give up. Hoping for a glimmer of humanity, Ash turned to Yubel, who was watching him with a faint smile. Yubel, we may have had some misunderstandings at first, but I treated you well later, didn't I? Ash asked, clinging to his last shred of optimism. Don't you understand? Yubel's half-closed eyes gleamed with a malicious glint as she smiled knowingly. It was clear Yubel intended to use this opportunity to settle old scores. At that moment, Ash fully grasped the reality of his situation. Perhaps it was karmic retribution for his usual antics, but his companions were not only intent on handling the matter impartially, some seemed to be outright targeting him. As expected. Well, I'll just keep you company for a while, Ash muttered, resigning himself to his fate. After all, I don't like losing either. Even though the others had partners and he didn't, Ash didn't see it as a major issue. Like Frieren, he found himself growing intrigued by the challenge. After all, his goal wasn't something as small as this exam, it was the world itself. If he couldn't handle this, he might as well give up and go home early to hug the thigh of the rich lowly, who was undoubtedly watching from the sidelines. Chapter 116, Are you here to take an exam or to have an outing? Faced with the girl's vengeful glares and complaints, Ash could somewhat understand that this animosity stemmed from his daily behavior. But changing himself? That was never an option. After all, wasn't it easier to change others than to change himself? Forget it. Bullying an old widower like me is clearly unjust. Even if not for my own sake, I must teach you a lesson in the name of justice. With this bold declaration, he struck a righteous pose, brimming with self-assurance. Only this man. How dare he say such a thing? Frieren's cold gaze bore into him, her disdain so palpable it could cut through steel. Fern mirrored her expression, shaking her head as she added, Master. Ash's character truly needs correcting. He should at least learn to be gentler with girls. Otherwise, it's no wonder he's been single for so many years. Though I've always known you were shameless, I didn't expect you to lie so boldly, Yubel said, a sly smile playing on her lips. But don't worry. I'll get to know you better during the exam. I'll treat you just as you've treated me before. Sound fair? Of course, no problem, Ash replied, his tone calm but his eyes gleaming with defiance. Since you insist, I'll follow the rules. But when the time comes, we'll see who's the prey and who's the hunter. The girls, either brimming with fighting spirit or glaring at him with contempt, didn't back down. Ash, refusing to admit defeat, met their looks with provocative confidence. At that moment, the fragile harmony of their group shattered entirely. Though their ultimate goal was to pass the exam and become first-class magicians, it seemed their daily grievances took precedence. As the group followed the examiner, preparing to leave the scene, Fern suddenly stopped and turned to Ash with a solemn expression. I don't need any mercy from Master Ash, she declared. But, if you fail to become a first-class magician, I'll be very angry and won't talk to you for a week. In the end, you're just dumping all the responsibility on me, aren't you? Ash sighed. Of course, Fern replied with a mischievous smile, tilting her head. Didn't you once say that a man should be responsible? So, Master Ash, let's see how well you live up to your own words. With that, she nodded in satisfaction and walked away, leaving no room for rebuttal. Fern still a little angry, hey? Is that why she said that? Ash muttered to himself. But I really don't like being forced into responsibility. Still, he understood. Taking care of children, or rather, dealing with their willfulness, required patience. And Fern, with her regained smile, was undeniably adorable. There wasn't much to complain about, after all. But soon, Ash's gaze shifted toward the distance, where spectators gathered. Among them were 2 level 6 magicians observing the third-tier candidates this year. Among the crowd, a small, familiar figure caught his attention, Sense. Meanwhile, a bespectacled man with slicked back hair, appearing to be in his 30s, scanned the area with a researcher's precision. Falsch, the assistant examiner in charge of auxiliary affairs. Sense, responsible for overseeing the second round of evaluations, seemed intent on avoiding the bespectacled man's gaze. There are quite a few strong contenders this year, the man mused aloud, his sharp eyes surveying the candidates. But when he noticed Sense's odd behavior, he frowned and asked, What's wrong? Do you know that young man? This is not a matter of acquaintance, Sense muttered casually, a hint of guilt in her tone as he thought of someone's willful behavior that had deliberately made things difficult for others, forcing her to secretly operate the bracelet. She tried to sound nonchalant, though her feelings betrayed her. "You're the one who passed last term, and when Lady Saria convened a meeting 2 years ago, you probably hadn't seen him outside yet. Is he a very powerful guy? By the way, Lady Saria actually meets outsiders? Doesn't she usually ignore even nobles?" Falch couldn't help but stare at Ash in confusion. Observing his magic fluctuations, he evaluated, the fluctuations in his magic must be concealing his true strength. "But it's strange I can't discern his original magic power. Did he use some special magic? You'll find out soon enough. If you're impatient, you can ask the others." "Most of them already know," Sense replied, her gaze fixed on Ash. Sense, keeping her head down, overwhelmed with guilt, had no interest in chatting with her new colleague. It's worth noting that Saria was one of the rare individuals who showed no fear of authority. On the other hand, the old court wizard Denkin, a second-class magician taking the exam at this venue, was a typical power worshipper. Denkin had witnessed countless magicians, many of whom were more talented than himself or even comparable to first-class magicians, being persecuted, imprisoned, or executed. But there was no alternative. Most of the powerful figures in this world obeyed the nobles and the state, refusing to resist even when persecuted. Under such circumstances, the rules of the land could not constrain someone like Saria, who was eccentric, selfish, and willful. Thus, even the court magician, despite his influence, had no choice but to take the exam obediently. When the Magic Association was first established, Saria, who had just emerged from the mountains, clashed with the goddess church and the nobles of the holy city. The conflict escalated to the point where she nearly destroyed the holy city. For the sake of maintaining their reputation, the holy city kept this incident under wraps. It wasn't until much later that Ash learned of it. He realized then that Saria was far from ordinary. He finally understood her character and how she had established the Magic Association. In essence, she had used sheer force to establish her status, overpowering laws and rules with strength beyond comprehension. This left the nobles with no recourse, even if they despised her. After all, Saria wasn't someone who could be imprisoned like other magicians. Thus, when it came to Ash, he granted Saria special privileges not out of filial piety or a desire to protect his master, but purely to avoid unnecessary trouble. He didn't want anyone foolish enough to provoke her and cause problems for himself. Chapter 117, Start of the Exam. The first round of exams was held in a suburban basin far from the Magic City. A massive, city-level magic circle enveloped a lake within the basin and the surrounding forest. In this examination area, there's a small bird called the meteoritic bird, the examiner explained, holding up a small cage containing one of the birds. The cage had a special barrier designed to seal the meteoritic bird. There are only 2 conditions for this test. First, you must capture a meteoritic bird, place it in the cage, and return it before sunset tomorrow. Second, all team members must survive. After this explanation, the examiner distributed magic signal transmitters resembling signal guns to the participants. Each signal gun could only fire a single flare, and losing or using it was considered a failure. Each gun bore a unique magic mark as its exclusive identifier. Once fired, the mark would be displayed in front of the user, ensuring others could not attack them. There was also a small safe zone at the edge of the examination area. Participants who wished to surrender could head there, but reaching the safe zone was considered an automatic forfeiture. Hearing this final rule, the crowd murmured in surprise, particularly Frieren, who seemed taken aback. Another notable figure on Can's team was Lawine, a close friend of Fern. Lawine had long silver hair cascading to her waist, stunning blue eyes, and wore a meticulously styled blue dress. The hem of the dress swayed lightly, complementing her over-the-knee white boots. Her outfit exuded a gothic Lolita aesthetic, but Lawine's unexpectedly graceful figure added a striking contrast. Her well-proportioned curves, upright posture, and elegant lines perfectly captured the essence of contrasting cuteness. She was undeniably a young lady with an air of refined beauty. At this moment, however, Lawine's ladylike demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she was forcefully pinning Ken to the ground in what appeared to be a scuffle. As was often the case in Ash's household, Lawine had the upper hand, easily overpowering Ken. In the past, I never cared about life. What's going on this time? By the way, Lawine muttered to herself, her tone tinged with frustration. Having brothers in the Magic Association, Lawine was somewhat familiar with the history of the exam. Yet, as she pressed Ken, who was struggling beneath her, she gritted her teeth and barked, "Ken! Stop resisting and give me the cage. No. I should be the one to take it. La Wine, you should give up. Kin, clearly outmatched in strength, stubbornly refused to admit defeat and continued pushing back against her. Their unusual display, complete with makeshift spear and shield-like objects, left Frieren watching from the sidelines with a perplexed expression. She wasn't sure what to say. But then again, this was typical behavior in Ash's household. Perhaps there was no need to intervene? Just as she decided to let it go, Ash had already approached the two. Frieren sighed and gave up trying to stop them, but Ash crouched down beside the pair. La Wine and Kin, locked in their love-hate squabble, turned to look at him. Ash suddenly smiled and said, "I know you two enjoy bickering, it's practically a sign of your close bond. But wouldn't it be better to set aside your differences for now? You do have an exam to focus on, after all. It's 3 against 1 right now, shouldn't you, a lone guy, just run away?" La Wine snapped, glaring at him with hostility in her striking blue eyes. "Why are kids these days so unfriendly to others?" Ash replied with exaggerated exasperation. "Because that other is you," La Wine shot back without hesitation. "Let the past stay in the past. We should focus on the future. Dwelling on the past only holds us back," Ash said, his tone carrying the weight of experience. He smiled and reached out to pat La Wine on the head. "What? Who does this old man think he is?" La Wine muttered, clearly annoyed. If she weren't busy wrestling with Kin, she might have lashed out at him. "You're not a stranger, are you? Didn't you stay over at my house last night?" Ash teased. "That was Fern's house." La Wine retorted indignantly. "It's my home too," Ash said with a grin. "Then if I kill you now, it'll belong only to Fern," La Wine said with a dangerous smile. Ash, however, remained unfazed. He shook his head indifferently. "Is this how you treat your friend's parents? Is this how you treat your child's friend?" La Wine shot back. "Because you're my child's friend, I'm trying to build a good relationship with you. Otherwise, every time you visit, you'll just glare at me with that sour face, and honestly, it makes me uncomfortable. I hate adults who don't respect kids. Because you're a child, right? I've already explained my side of things. I had my reasons, and didn't I still fulfill my responsibilities as a guardian in the end? What kind of reasons could you possibly have?" La Wine narrowed her eyes. "Don't think I'm like the others and don't know anything. I know your true identity. I can't imagine someone like you having any real difficulties." "That's the perspective of a child," Ash replied with a faint smile. "I'm busy, after all. Taking care of children is, well, let's just say it's challenging." "Oh, forget it. I'll leave you to it." Although Ash found the peculiar dynamic with his daughter's friends amusing and even a little thrilling, he decided not to push further. Teasing girls like La Wine had a strange, stimulating charm, but he knew when to stop. If he claimed he was too busy to deal with them, it would only provoke their anger. So, with a hint of regret, he turned and walked away silently. Compared to the groups of 3 scattered across the venue, his solitary figure appeared oddly desolate and lonely. This sight made Kin hesitate and feel a pang of guilt. Is this really okay? I mean, even though that uncle can be irresponsible at times, didn't he still raise Fern? And he did apologize. If he gets attacked here. Kin, La Wine interrupted firmly, you have to teach adults like him a lesson. What if he decides to abandon Fern again? Have you forgotten that Fern said he wanted to find someone to adopt her in the Holy City? This. Kin hesitated further. La Wine, watching Ash's retreating figure, added one final remark. That guy won't be killed so easily. He's a bad uncle, sure, but he's also a scary one. He's amazing, but there are so many powerful people here. That guy's stronger than you think. Instead of worrying about him, we should focus on ourselves, La Wine said, shaking her head and cutting off Kin's concerns. Meanwhile, Frieren stood by, observing the two with an indescribable expression. Even while discussing Ash, La Wine and Kin were still pushing and shoving each other. Is this team really okay? Frieren muttered with a long sigh, glancing between the bickering duo, Ash's disappearing figure, and the other teams moving steadily away.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.